Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Officer Truxton Largo eased the patrol unit onto the shoulder of US 191. Gravel crunching beneath worn tires as the headlights carved twin tunnels through absolute darkness. The clock on the dashboard read 2:17, its green glow the only color in a world drained to black and gray. He killed the engine and sat for a moment, hands still gripping the wheel, listening to the tick of cooling metal and the low moan of wind across the high desert. The call had come in 40 minutes earlier, May Watchman's voice crackling through the radio with that particular flatness she reserved for the worst situations. Missing person. Last seen near the turnoff to Luka Chukai. Vehicle abandoned. No sign of the driver. Truxton had copied the information in his notebook with careful block letters, the pencil scratching against paper the only sound in the cab besides his own breathing. He'd driven north from Chinley without backup, watching his odometer click past empty mile after empty mile, the road unwinding like a ribbon dropped across the mesa. Now he stepped out into air so cold it burned his lungs. The wind hit him immediately, steady and relentless, carrying the scent of sage and something else, something mineral and ancient that spoke of stone worn smooth by centuries. He pulled his jacket tighter and reached for the heavy flashlight mounted on his belt, its weight familiar and reassuring in his hand. The abandoned vehicle sat 50 yards ahead, a pale shape barely visible against the darker bulk of the road. Truxton approached on foot, boots finding purchase on loose stone, flashlight beam sweeping left and right in methodical arcs. The truck was a Chevy, maybe 15 years old, parked at an angle with the driver's door hanging open. No interior light, battery probably dead. The hood was cold when he touched it, engine silent for hours. He circled the vehicle slowly, noting every detail. Tire tracks led from the pavement onto the shoulder, deep grooves in the soft earth where the driver had braked hard. The passenger window was down halfway, glass intact. In the bed of the truck he found a spare tire, some loose rope, an empty water jug rolling against the tailgate. Nothing unusual, nothing that screamed emergency. But the driver's seat told a different story. The door hung open at an odd angle, hinges strained as though someone had yanked it with force. On the seat itself lay a woman's jacket, denim with silver buttons, folded neatly as if placed there with care. Truxton lifted it with 2 fingers, examining the pockets. Empty, no wallet, no identification, no keys. He straightened and looked out across the landscape. The road stretched in both directions, a pale scar cutting through darkness. To the east, the ground sloped upward towards the base of a mesa, its bulk a deeper shadow against the sky. To the west, the land fell away into washes and arroyos, invisible in the night but mapped in Truxton's memory from years of driving these routes. The wind gusted, and he heard it then. A sound so faint he almost dismissed it as imagination, a scraping, rhythmic, like boot heels dragging across stone. He froze, holding his breath, straining to isolate the direction. There, southwest, maybe 200 yards out. He clicked off the flashlight and let his eyes adjust, pupils widening to drink in starlight. Movement, a shape, low to the ground, shifting against the static darkness of rock and brush. Truxton's hand moved to his radio, fingers finding the transmit button by feel. He keyed the mic twice, the double click his signal to May that he'd found something, then released it and moved forward without waiting for acknowledgement. The ground changed beneath his feet, gravel giving way to hardpan, and then loose sand that whispered against his boots. He kept the shape in his peripheral vision, not looking directly at it, using the old trick his grandfather had taught him for seeing in darkness. The scraping sound grew louder, punctuated now by a wet, labored breathing that raised the hair on the back of his neck. 30 yards out he stopped and raised the flashlight, thumb on the switch but not yet pressing it. The breathing was close now, maybe 20 feet ahead and to his left. He could hear the wind in the sage, the distant call of some night bird, and beneath it all that terrible struggling sound of someone or something fighting for air. He hit the light. The beam caught her full in the face, eyes wide and wild, mouth open in a silent scream. She was on her knees in the sand, hands clawing at the ground, leaving parallel grooves in the earth. Her hair hung in her face, matted with dust and sweat. She wore jeans and a thin shirt, no shoes, feet bleeding from cuts that painted dark streaks across pale skin. Truxton moved forward, holstering the flashlight and raising both hands to show they were empty. "Ma'am," he called, voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "Navajo police. You're safe now." She didn't respond, didn't even seem to hear him, just kept clawing at the ground, pulling herself forward inch by inch as though dragging a great weight. Her breathing came in gasps, each inhale a shuddering rattle that spoke of exhaustion beyond bearing. He knelt beside her, close enough to touch but not touching, and tried again. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Largo. Can you hear me? Are you hurt?" This time her eyes flickered toward him, just for a moment, and he saw something there that made his chest tighten. Not fear, not pain. Recognition. As though she'd been expecting him, waiting for him in this empty darkness. Her lips moved, forming words without sound. Truxton leaned closer, close enough to smell the copper of blood and the salt of sweat. She spoke again, barely a whisper, and this time he caught it. "They're still here." The wind chose that moment to die, leaving a silence so complete it felt like pressure against his eardrums. Truxton stayed very still, eyes scanning the darkness beyond the small circle of his flashlight beam. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed except the woman and himself. "Who's still here?" he asked quietly. She shook her head, a violent jerk that set her whole body trembling. Her hands curled into fists, nails digging into her palms hard enough to draw blood. "The others," she whispered. "The ones who were in the truck." Truxton's mind raced. May had said nothing about passengers, nothing about anyone but a single driver gone missing. He keyed his radio, keeping his voice low and calm. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I've located the missing person. Female, conscious, appears injured. Requesting immediate medical response to my location." Static answered him for 3 long seconds before May's voice crackled through. "Copy that, 12. EMS is 40 minutes out from Chinle. Do you need additional units?" He looked down at the woman, at her bleeding feet and torn fingernails, at the strange, precise grooves she'd carved in the sand. "Affirmative," he said. "Send Sergeant Bagady if he's available. And May, run the plate on that Chevy, see if it comes back registered to multiple occupants." "Copy. Stand by." Truxton returned his attention to the woman. She'd stopped moving, stopped clawing at the earth, and now sat back on her heels with her head bowed. Her breathing had slowed, each inhale deep and measured as though she were counting them. He shrugged out of his jacket and draped it over her shoulders, careful not to startle her. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked. She lifted her head, and in the flashlight's beam he could see her face clearly for the first time. Late 30s, maybe early 40s, with strong features and dark eyes that seemed to look through him rather than at him. A thin line of blood traced from her hairline down her temple, already drying to a dark crust. "Nadine," she said, voice stronger now. "Nadine Tallsalt." The name meant nothing to Truxton, but he nodded and pulled out his notebook, flipping to a clean page. "Nadine, I need you to tell me what happened. Start from the beginning. Where were you going tonight?" She blinked slowly, as though struggling to remember. "Home," she said finally. "Driving home from Shiprock, alone." The last word came out with emphasis, almost defiant. "The truck back there, that's yours?" "Yes." "Why did you stop?" Her eyes slid away from his, focusing on something in the middle distance that he couldn't see. "There was something in the road," she said. "Standing in the road. I hit the brakes, pulled over, got out to look. What was it? I don't know." The words came quickly now, tumbling over each other. "It was dark. I couldn't see clearly. But it moved. It walked toward the truck and I ran. Just ran. Didn't think. Just ran." Truxton made notes, his handwriting cramped in the dim light. "Which direction did you run?" She pointed southwest, the same direction he'd found her. "Into the dark. Away from the road. I fell, kept falling. Couldn't find my way back. Kept walking until I couldn't walk anymore." The timeline didn't quite add up. May had said the truck was reported abandoned 3 hours ago, called in by a passing driver who'd noticed it sitting dark with the door open. If Nadine had been out here that long, stumbling through the desert in the cold, she should be hypothermic by now. But her skin was warm when he'd touched her shoulder, and she wasn't shivering. He was about to ask another question when his radio crackled to life. "Unit 12, this is dispatch. Go ahead, May. That plate comes back to Nadine Tallsalt, address in Luka Chukai. No other registered occupants, but Truxton, there's something else. We've got a report from 2 weeks ago. Different woman, different vehicle, same stretch of road. She claimed she saw people walking alongside US 191 near mile marker 47. Said they were following her truck." Truxton felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What happened to her?" "Nothing. She made it home, filed the report the next day. We sent a unit out to check but found nothing. Chalked it up to road fatigue. What's the mile marker on my location?" A pause. 46. He clicked off and looked at Nadine. She was watching him now, eyes bright and focused in a way that made him uneasy. "You heard that?" he asked. "Yes. Is there anything else you need to tell me?" She smiled then, a thin, humorless expression that didn't reach her eyes. "You won't find them," she said. "They don't want to be found. They only show themselves when they're ready." "When who's ready?" But she'd turned away, pulling his jacket tighter around her shoulders and staring out into the darkness. Truxton followed her gaze and saw nothing but empty land stretching to the horizon, broken only by the skeletal shapes of sage and the distant bulk of the mesa. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the wind resuming its low moan across the desert. Truxton checked his watch. 35 minutes until the ambulance arrived. Sergeant Hosea Begedy would be here sooner, maybe 20 minutes if he was already on patrol in the northern sector. He stood and walked a slow circle around Nadine, playing his flashlight across the ground. The grooves she'd carved in the sand were clear and deliberate, parallel lines running southwest for maybe 15 feet before ending in the spot where he'd found her. He knelt and examined them more closely. They weren't random. They were too straight, too evenly spaced, almost like markers. "Nadine," he said, without looking at her, "why were you digging in the sand?" "I wasn't digging." "Then what were you doing?" "Following." He turned to face her. "Following what?" She met his eyes, and in her expression he saw something that made his mouth go dry. Not madness, not confusion. Certainty. Absolute, unshakable certainty. "The tracks," she said simply. Truxton looked down at the grooves again, then out past them into the darkness. His flashlight beam wasn't strong enough to reach far, but he could see disturbed sand continuing beyond where Nadine had stopped, a trail leading deeper into the desert. He stood and followed it, counting his steps. 10 yards, 20, 30. The trail ended abruptly at the edge of a shallow wash, the sand giving way to exposed bedrock. He swept the light across the stone looking for any sign of passage, but the rock was smooth and unmarked. Whatever had made those tracks, if they were tracks at all, had vanished. When he returned to Nadine, she was standing. She'd wrapped his jacket around herself like a blanket, arms crossed over her chest. She looked steadier now, more present, though her feet still left small blood prints in the sand. "How many were there?" he asked quietly. She didn't pretend not to understand. 3, she said, maybe 4. Hard to tell in the dark. Walking together? In a line, single file. Like they knew where they were going. And you followed them. "I had to." Her voice was matter-of-fact, as though explaining something obvious. "They had my daughter." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Truxton felt his pulse quicken. "Your daughter was in the truck with you?" "No." Nadine shook her head slowly. "My daughter died 6 years ago, but they had her. I saw her walking with them. She looked back at me and I couldn't just sit there. I had to follow." A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature crawled up Truxton's spine. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it, choosing his words carefully. "Nadine, I need you to listen to me. You've been through something traumatic tonight. Your mind might be playing tricks, making you see things that aren't there. It's common after a shock." She smiled again, that same humorless expression. "You think I'm crazy? I think you're hurt and exhausted and possibly in shock." Then explain the tracks. He couldn't. That was the problem. He'd seen them himself, clear, parallel grooves in the sand leading from the road deep into the desert. He'd followed them to the wash and watched them disappear on bare rock. And now this woman was telling him she'd carved those grooves with her bare hands, following shapes that may or may not have existed. Headlights appeared in the distance, growing brighter as a vehicle approached from the north. Truxton recognized the profile of Sergeant Bagoti's patrol unit even before it pulled to a stop beside his own. The engine cut off and Hosea climbed out, a tall, solid man with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. He took in the scene with a single sweep of his gaze. Nadine wrapped in Truxton's jacket, the abandoned Chevy behind them, the disturbed sand leading away into darkness. He walked over slowly, boots deliberate on the gravel. "Officer Largo," he said by way of greeting, then turned to Nadine. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Bagoti. Medical help is on the way. Are you in pain?" "No more than I should be," Nadine replied. Hosea glanced at Truxton, one eyebrow raised in silent question. Truxton gave a small shake of his head. Not here, not now. They'd talk later, away from Nadine's hearing. "Tell me what happened," Hosea said, pulling out his own notebook. Truxton walked him through it, keeping his voice level and professional. The abandoned truck, the search, finding Nadine in the sand. He left out the part about the tracks for now, left out Nadine's claim about seeing her dead daughter. Just the facts, just what could be documented and verified. Hosea listened without interrupting, making occasional notes in his cramped handwriting. When Truxton finished, the sergeant walked over to examine the Chevy himself. flashlight probing the interior and the truck bed. He spent a long time looking at something in the sand near the driver's door, crouching low to get a better angle. When he returned, his expression was carefully neutral. "The medical team should be here in about 15 minutes, he said. "Truxton, help me get some flares set up so they can spot us easier. Ma'am, you just rest. We'll get you taken care of." They walked back toward the road out of Nadine's earshot. Hosea pulled road flares from his unit and handed 2 to Truxton without speaking. They worked in silence, striking the flares and placing them at intervals along the shoulder, the brilliant red light casting long shadows across the desert. When they were done, Hosea leaned against his unit and folded his arms. "All right," he said quietly. "Tell me the rest." Truxton did. The tracks in the sand. Nadine's story about following shapes into the darkness. Her claim about seeing her daughter. Hosea listened with the same patient attention he gave everything, his face revealing nothing. "You believe her?" he asked when Truxton finished. "I believe she believes it." "That's not what I asked." Truxton was quiet for a moment, choosing his words. "I saw the tracks myself, Hosea. They're real. They lead straight out into the desert and end at the wash. I don't know what made them, but they're there. Could be animal tracks. Coyote, maybe, or deer. Parallel grooves, evenly spaced, running in a straight line for 30 yards. What kind of animal does that?" Hosea didn't answer. He was looking past Truxton, out into the darkness where the flares couldn't reach. "May said there was another report," he said finally. "2 weeks ago, same area. Woman claimed she saw people walking alongside the road." "That's right." "Did May mention that we've had 3 other reports in the last month? All of them along this stretch of highway, all of them at night. People seeing things, hearing things. One man swore he watched someone walk straight through a barbed wire fence without slowing down." Truxton felt that chill again, deeper this time. "Why wasn't I briefed on this?" "Because we don't know what it means yet. Could be nothing. Could be people seeing what they expect to see out here in the dark. You know how it is, Truxton. This country plays tricks on your eyes. Or it could be something." Hosea met his gaze. "Yes," he said simply. "It could be something." They stood in silence. 2 men on a dark road listening to the wind and watching for headlights that would bring help and answers, or at least the promise of them. In the distance, Nadine sat wrapped in Truxton's jacket, staring out at the desert as though waiting for something to emerge from its depths. The ambulance arrived 18 minutes later, lights strobing red and white across the landscape. 2 paramedics climbed out and went to work with efficient professionalism, checking Nadine's vitals and cleaning the cuts on her feet. She submitted to their care without protest, answering their questions in a flat voice that gave away nothing. As they loaded her into the back of the ambulance, she caught Truxton's eye. "You should leave before it gets light," she said. "Why?" "Because they don't like being seen. And now you've seen them. Or their marks, at least. They'll know." The paramedic closed the door before Truxton could respond, and the ambulance pulled away, its lights fading to pinpoints in the distance before vanishing entirely. He stood watching until even the sound of its engine was swallowed by the desert silence. Hosea came to stand beside him. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Truxton looked at the abandoned Chevy, at the flares still burning crimson along the shoulder, at the vast, empty darkness beyond. "I want to follow those tracks," he said. "See where they really go. Now? Dawn's only a few hours away. If there's something out there, I want to find it in daylight." Hosea was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right," he said. "But we do this smart. We get proper gear, we tell May exactly where we're going, and we don't split up. Understood?" "Understood." They spent the next hour preparing, gathering supplies from both patrol units. Extra flashlights, water, a first aid kit, road flares, a length of rope. Hosea had a compass and a hand-drawn map of the area, marked with old trails and known landmarks. Truxton had his notebook and a camera with a flash. At 0430, with the sky still black but beginning to pale at the eastern horizon, they set out. The tracks were easy to follow at first, clear grooves in the sand that caught and held their flashlight beams. They walked in silence, Hosea in the lead with the compass, Truxton bringing up the rear and stopping every 20 yards to mark their own trail with small cairns of stacked stones. The tracks led them southwest, away from the road and deeper into broken country. The land rose and fell in gentle swells, cut by dry washes and studded with sage and juniper. Their boots crunched on loose stone and sand, the sound loud in the pre-dawn stillness. After half a mile, the tracks changed. The parallel grooves gave way to something else, a disturbed area of sand roughly circular and maybe 10 feet across. It looked as though something had thrashed there, churning the earth. Truxton knelt and examined it closely, his flashlight revealing dozens of small impressions that might have been footprints or might have been nothing at all. "What do you make of this?" he asked Hosea. The sergeant crouched beside him, running his fingers through the disturbed sand. "Could be anything," he said. "Wind, animals, runoff from rain. Or it could be where Nadine fell. Could be." They moved on, following the trail as it resumed beyond the churned area. The sky was definitely lighter now, the stars beginning to fade. Truxton could make out shapes in the distance, the dark bulk of rock formations rising against the coming dawn. The tracks led them to the wash Truxton had found earlier, where they ended abruptly at exposed bedrock. But now, with better light and more time, they could see something he'd missed before. Scratches on the stone, faint but visible, running in the same southwest direction. Hosea knelt and traced one with his finger. "Something with claws," he said, "or something sharp enough to score rock." They followed the scratches across 20 yards of bare stone before the sand resumed on the far side, and there, clear in the soft earth, were the tracks again. But they were different now, deeper, more defined, and there were more of them. Truxton counted under his breath. 4 sets, he said. 4 distinct trails, all running parallel. "You're sure?" "Look for yourself." Hosea did, playing his flashlight across the sand. His jaw tightened. "All right," he said quietly. 4 it is. The question is for what? They had no answer for that. They simply followed, their own shadows growing longer as the sun crept toward the horizon behind them. The tracks led them into a narrow canyon, walls rising steep on either side, the sky a ribbon of indigo overhead. Here the sand was deep and soft, muffling their footsteps. The tracks were clearer than ever, and Truxton could see now that they weren't all the same. 2 were narrow and straight, like something dragged. The other 2 were wider, with regular indentations that might have been toes or claws. The canyon opened into a small box canyon, walls curving around to form a natural amphitheater maybe 50 yards across. And there, in the center, the tracks ended. Not gradually, not fading away. They simply stopped, all 4 trails terminating in a rough circle of disturbed earth. Truxton and Hosea approached slowly, flashlights sweeping the area. There was nothing there. No bodies, no equipment, no sign that anyone or anything had ever existed. Just the tracks, ending in emptiness. The sun broke the horizon as they stood there, golden light spilling across the canyon walls and illuminating the sand with sudden clarity. In that light, Truxton saw something that made his breath catch. On the canyon wall directly above the circle of disturbed earth, someone had carved symbols into the rock. Old symbols, weathered and faint, but unmistakably deliberate. He pointed without speaking. Hosea followed his gesture and went very still. They climbed the loose scree at the base of the wall to get a closer look. The symbols were small, each one maybe 6 inches across, arranged in a horizontal line. Truxton didn't recognize them, but he photographed each one carefully while Hosea copied them into his notebook. When they were done, they stood side by side looking down at the empty circle below. The tracks led here and nowhere else. Whatever had made them had ended its journey in this place. "We need to report this," Hosea said finally. "Report what? That we found some tracks that stopped for no reason? That there are old carvings on a canyon wall? That something happened here, something we don't understand?" Truxton couldn't argue with that. They descended the scree and walked back through the canyon in silence, following their cairn markers like breadcrumbs leading home. By the time they reached the patrol units, the sun was fully up, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. May's voice crackled through the radio as soon as Truxton climbed into his unit. "Unit 12, what's your status?" "Back at the vehicle," he replied. "We're code 4. "Copy that. Hospital called. Nadine Tallsalt is stable, being kept for observation. Doctor says she's dehydrated and exhausted, but otherwise unharmed. She's asking for you." Truxton exchanged a glance with Hosea. "Tell them I'll be there within the hour," he said. They drove back to Chinle without speaking, each man lost in his own thoughts. The tracks, the symbols, the empty circle where everything ended. None of it made sense, and all of it felt wrong in a way that Truxton couldn't articulate. At the station, he filed his report with mechanical precision, documenting everything they'd found. The abandoned truck, Nadine's condition, the tracks, the canyon, the symbols. He attached the photographs and copied Hosea's sketches of the carvings. Then he sealed it all in an envelope and handed it to May. "Send copies to the regional office," he said. "Mark it for review." May took the envelope without comment, but her eyes were sharp and knowing. She'd heard the tone in his voice, recognized the weight of something unresolved. "You heading to the hospital?" she asked. "Yeah." "Want some advice?" "Always." She leaned forward, elbows on her desk. "Whatever she tells you, write it down exactly as she says it. Don't interpret, don't explain, just listen and record. Sometimes the truth isn't in what makes sense. Sometimes it's in what doesn't." Truxton nodded slowly. May had been dispatching for the Navajo police for 30 years. If she said to write it down, he'd write it down. The hospital was a low building on the outskirts of Chinle, its white walls bright against the red earth. Truxton found Nadine in a private room, sitting up in bed with her bandaged feet elevated. She looked better. Color returned to her face, eyes clear and focused. She smiled when she saw him. "Officer Largo, thank you for coming." He pulled up a chair and sat, notebook ready. "How are you feeling?" "Foolish," she said. "The doctor says I'm lucky I didn't freeze to death out there." "You are lucky, but you're also here, which means you've got questions that need answers." Her smile faded. "You followed the tracks." It wasn't a question. Truxton nodded. "We did. They led to a box canyon about 2 miles southwest of where I found you. They ended in a circle. Nothing there, no sign of what made them. But you saw the marks on the wall. How did you know about those?" She looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. "Because I've seen them before," she said quietly. 6 years ago, the night my daughter disappeared. I found them carved into a rock near where we lost her trail. Same symbols, same arrangement. I never told anyone because I knew how it would sound. Truxton felt his pulse quicken. Your daughter disappeared in the same area? Not the same, but close. Maybe 5 miles north. We were hiking. She wandered off. We never found her. Search and rescue looked for 3 days. Nothing, like she just vanished. And you think what you saw last night was connected to that? Nadine met his eyes. I don't think, Officer Largo, I know. They took her then and they showed her to me last night. I don't know why, don't know what they want. But they're real, and they're still out there. Who are they? I don't know. Old things. Things that were here before roads, before trucks, before us. Things that walk these lands and take what they want. She said it with such conviction that Truxton found himself believing her, or at least believing that she believed it absolutely. He wrote it all down, every word, just as May had advised. When he was done, Nadine reached out and touched his hand. Be careful, she said. You've seen their marks now. They know you, and they don't like being pursued. Truxton left the hospital as the afternoon sun climbed toward its zenith, his notebook full of words that raised more questions than they answered. He drove back to the station slowly, mind churning through possibilities and finding none that satisfied. Hosea was waiting in the squad room, a mug of coffee cooling on the desk beside him. He looked up when Truxton entered. Well, she says the symbols are the same ones she saw 6 years ago, the night her daughter disappeared. Hosea set down his mug carefully. Her daughter's disappearance is on file? Should be. I'm going to pull the report. They spent the next 2 hours in the records room, digging through filing cabinets until they found it. The case file was thin, just a few pages documenting a search that had turned up nothing. But clipped to the back was a photograph, faded and creased, showing a rock face with symbols carved into it. Truxton held it up to the light. The symbols were identical to the ones they'd found that morning. This can't be a coincidence, he said. No, Hosea agreed. It can't. They sat in silence, the weight of implication settling over them. Somewhere out in the desert, something was walking. Something that left tracks and marks and took people who were never seen again. Something old and patient and utterly unknown. Truxton closed the file and stood. We need to go back, he said. Document everything properly, search the area in daylight. Maybe we missed something. Maybe, Hosea said, but his tone suggested he doubted it. They would return to the canyon at first light, Truxton decided. They would search every inch of ground, photograph every mark, leave no stone unturned. And if they found nothing, they would search again. Because now it wasn't just about Nadine Tallsalt and her strange night in the desert. Now, it was about a missing girl, 6 years gone, and symbols that connected past to present in ways that defied explanation. The sun was setting as Truxton drove home, painting the desert in shades of crimson and gold. He thought about tracks that ended in emptiness, about old carvings on canyon walls, about a woman who claimed to have seen her dead daughter walking in the dark. And somewhere out in that vast landscape, beneath the gathering stars, something waited. Truxton arrived at the station before sunrise, the sky still dark but beginning to pale at the eastern edge. His headlights swept across the empty parking lot as he pulled in beside Hosea's unit, already there, engine ticking as it cooled. Through the station windows he could see lights on in the squad room, May's silhouette moving behind the glass. He killed the engine and sat for a moment, hands resting on the wheel. He'd slept poorly, what little sleep he'd managed, interrupted by dreams of parallel tracks running through sand, leading him deeper and deeper into darkness that never ended. When he'd finally given up at 4 a.m, he'd made coffee and sat at his kitchen table reviewing his notes from the day before, trying to find some pattern or explanation that made sense. He'd found nothing, just tracks that shouldn't exist, symbols that connected a current case to one 6 years old, and a woman's absolute certainty that something had taken her daughter and shown her a glimpse of the girl in the dark. Inside, Hosea was already geared up, a heavy pack on the table beside him. He looked up when Truxton entered, nodded once. "Coffee's fresh," he said, gesturing to the pot on the counter. Truxton poured himself a cup, black, and took a long swallow. It was bitter and strong, exactly what he needed. "May briefed you?" he asked. "She did. Also pulled some additional files from archives. You need to see them." May emerged from the records room carrying a cardboard box, the kind used for long-term storage. She set it on the table with a thump that raised dust. 1968 through 1972, she said. 4 missing person cases, all within a 20-mile radius of where you found those tracks yesterday. All of them unsolved. Truxton opened the box and pulled out the first file. The paper was yellowed, the typewriter ink faded, but the words were still legible. Thomas Yazzie, age 43, last seen walking along US 191 near mile marker 45. Vehicle found abandoned, no sign of the driver. Search conducted for 5 days, no results. The second file was similar. Rita Nez, age 27, vehicle found off the road near Lukachukai. Footprints led away from the car and ended at a rocky outcrop. No further trace. The third and fourth followed the same pattern. People vanishing near the same stretch of highway, always at night, always leaving vehicles behind. And in each case, the search had been called off after a week with nothing to show for it. "Look at the dates," May said quietly. Truxton did. Thomas Yazzie had disappeared on October 14th. Rita Nez on October 13th the following year. The other 2, same month, same narrow window of days. He felt something cold settle in his chest. "Every year," he said. "For 4 years running, then nothing for decades. Until now." Hosea was already spreading a map across the table, marking locations with a red pencil. Each X fell within a rough circle, maybe 15 miles across, centered on the stretch of highway where they'd found Nadine. "It's a pattern," he said, "not random. Someone or something operating in a specific area, specific time of year." "Nadine's daughter disappeared in April," Truxton pointed out. "That doesn't fit." "No, it doesn't, unless there's something else we're missing." May pulled out a chair and sat, her face drawn with exhaustion. She'd clearly been up most of the night digging through archives. "There's one more thing," she said. "I called the BIA office in Window Rock, asked if they had any historical records of unusual activity in this area. They sent over some documents from the 1920s. Oral histories mostly, collected by a researcher who was documenting traditional stories." She pulled a sheaf of photocopied pages from the box and spread them out. The writing was cramped and old-fashioned, full of formal academic language that couldn't quite hide the strangeness of what it described. Stories of travelers who vanished on the old trails, of shapes seen walking in moonlight, of places where the earth itself seemed wrong. And in 3 separate accounts there were descriptions of marks on stone, symbols carved in a line, old beyond memory, marking places where the boundary between the world and something else grew thin. Truxton read through them slowly, his coffee growing cold in his hand. The accounts were vague, frustratingly so, full of euphemisms and careful avoidance of direct statement. But the underlying message was clear. This land had a history of taking people, and it had been doing so for a very long time. "We need to go back," he said, looking up at Hosea. "Document everything we can find, search wider. Maybe there's something in those canyons we missed." "Agreed. I've got climbing rope, extra water, flares. We should be good for a full day if we need it." They loaded the gear into Hosea's unit, the heavier vehicle better suited for rough terrain. May watched from the doorway, arms folded, her expression unreadable. "You two be careful," she said. "And Truxton, whatever you find out there, don't go looking for explanations that aren't there. Sometimes the not knowing is safer." He wanted to ask what she meant, but she'd already turned away, disappearing back into the station. He climbed into the passenger seat beside Hosea, and they pulled out onto the empty road as the sun broke the horizon behind them. The drive took 40 minutes, the highway unreeling through landscape that looked different in daylight. The mesas were rust red in the morning sun, their shadows long and sharp. Sage dotted the flats between washes, and far to the north he could see the dark line of the Chuska Mountains against the sky. They passed mile marker 46 and pulled off onto the shoulder near where the Chevy had been found. The truck was gone now, towed to the impound lot, but the disturbed gravel and tire tracks remained. Hosea killed the engine, and they sat for a moment, surveying the terrain. "We'll start at the wash and work our way back," Hosea said. "Grid search, 20-foot intervals. Anything we find gets photographed and marked." They set out on foot, following the same route they'd taken the day before. The tracks were still visible in the sand, though the wind had begun to blur them at the edges. Truxton photographed each section as they went, his camera clicking in the silence. At the wash, they split up, Hosea working north along the rock face while Truxton went south. The morning was already growing warm, heat radiating off the stone. Truxton's boots slipped on loose scree as he climbed to examine the wall more closely. The scratches they'd found were definitely deliberate, too regular to be natural erosion. He ran his fingers along them, feeling the grooves worn smooth by wind and time. Whatever had made them had pressed hard enough to gouge stone, which meant either tools or something with claws strong enough to cut rock. He was taking close-up photographs when Hosea called out, "Truxton, over here." He found the sergeant 30 yards north, crouched beside a cluster of boulders. Hosea pointed at the ground without speaking. There, in the sheltered space between rocks, was a footprint. Not the parallel tracks they'd been following, but an actual footprint, pressed deep in undisturbed sand. It was human-shaped, or close to it, but the proportions were wrong. Too long, too narrow, with impressions where toes should be that looked more like claws. And it was fresh, no more than a day or two old. Truxton knelt beside it and pulled out his measuring tape. 14 inches from heel to toe, maybe 5 inches across at the widest point. He photographed it from multiple angles, then used a stick to carefully mark the perimeter. "There's another one," Hosea said, pointing ahead. "And another." They followed the prints north away from the main trail they'd tracked yesterday. These were different, more purposeful, as though whatever made them had been searching for something. The prints led them up a shallow incline and into a narrow cleft between rock walls. The cleft was barely wide enough for them to walk single file, walls rising 10 feet on either side. It curved to the right, blocking any view of what lay ahead. Truxton felt his heartbeat quicken as they moved deeper, the light dimming as the walls closed in. The cleft opened suddenly into a small clearing, maybe 20 feet across, surrounded by smooth rock faces. And there, in the center, was a cairn. Not a natural formation, but deliberately stacked stones forming a cone about 3 feet high. Hosea circled it slowly, studying it from all angles. "Recent," he said. "These rocks haven't been here long enough to weather." Truxton photographed the cairn, then knelt to examine the ground around it. More footprints, the same elongated shape they'd found at the wash. They circled the cairn multiple times as though whoever or whatever had built it had walked around and around it in some kind of ritual. "Should we dismantle it?" he asked. Hosea was quiet for a long moment. "No, he said finally. "We document it, mark the location, but we don't touch it. Some things are better left alone." They spent another hour searching the clearing and the surrounding rocks, finding nothing else of note. The footprints led away from the cairn and disappeared on bare stone, just like the tracks from the day before. Whatever was making these marks knew how to vanish without a trace. By the time they returned to the patrol unit, the sun was high overhead, and the temperature had climbed into the 80s. Truxton's shirt was soaked with sweat, his throat dry despite the water he'd been drinking. They sat in the air-conditioned cab for a few minutes, reviewing the photographs and comparing them to Hosea's notes. "We've got enough for a report," Hosea said, "but I don't know what to make of it. Footprints that aren't quite human, a cairn that appeared overnight, tracks that vanish on stone. None of it adds up to anything I can explain." May said there might not be an explanation. "May's smarter than both of us put together." Hosea started the engine. "Let's head back, file what we've got, see if anyone at the regional office has seen anything like this before." They drove back to Chinley in silence, each man lost in thought. Truxton stared out the window at the passing landscape, wondering how many other people had disappeared into this emptiness over the years. How many sets of tracks had ended in nothing? How many searches had been called off with no answers? At the station, May was waiting with news. "Hospital called," she said. "Nadine Tallsalt checked herself out against medical advice. Left about 2 hours ago. Nurse said she seemed agitated, kept saying she needed to go back." "Back where?" Truxton asked, though he already knew the answer. "She didn't say, just signed the discharge papers and walked out." Truxton exchanged a glance with Hosea. They both knew what that meant. Nadine was going back to the canyon, back to the place where the tracks ended, and if she went alone, there was no guarantee she'd come back. "We need to find her," Truxton said. "Now." They grabbed fresh supplies and headed back out, driving faster than regulations strictly allowed. Truxton scanned the roadside as they went, looking for any sign of Nadine's truck or the woman herself. But the highway remained empty, just endless miles of desert rolling past. At the turnoff where they'd found her vehicle the first time, Hosea slowed and pulled onto the shoulder. There were fresh tire tracks in the gravel, narrow and deep. Truxton jumped out and examined them, then looked up at Hosea through the windshield. "She was here," he called. "Maybe an hour ago, based on how sharp these tracks are." They followed the tire tracks away from the highway, the patrol unit bouncing over rough ground. The tracks led southwest, the same direction as the footprints they'd been following. After half a mile, they found Nadine's truck parked at the entrance to the canyon. The driver's door was open, keys still in the ignition. But Nadine was nowhere to be seen. Truxton called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. No answer. He tried again, louder this time. Nothing but the wind and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. They moved into the canyon on foot, following the same trail they'd walked the day before. The sand showed fresh footprints, small and narrow, definitely a woman's. They were spaced far apart, as though Nadine had been running. The footprints led to the box canyon where the tracks had ended before. And there, standing in the center of the circle of disturbed earth, was Nadine. She was facing the far wall, her back to them, completely still. "Nadine," Truxton called softly. "It's Officer Largo. Are you all right?" She didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge his voice, just stood there, motionless, staring at the rock face where the symbols were carved. Truxton approached slowly, hands visible and empty. As he got closer, he could hear her whispering, the words too low to make out. He circled around to get a look at her face and felt his stomach drop. Her eyes were open but unfocused, pupils dilated so wide they looked black. Tears streamed down her face, but her expression was blank, almost serene. She was still whispering, the same phrase over and over, and now he could make out the words. "They're waiting, they're waiting, they're waiting." "Nadine," he said, reaching out to touch her shoulder. "Can you hear me?" Her head snapped toward him with sudden violence, and for a moment he saw something in her eyes that wasn't quite her, something cold and ancient that looked through him rather than at him. Then she blinked, and it was gone, leaving only confusion and fear. "Officer Largo?" Her voice was small, uncertain. "What am I doing here? You don't remember?" She looked around, taking in the canyon walls, the disturbed earth, her own position in the center of the circle. "I was at the hospital," she said slowly. "I was sleeping, and then I heard her, my daughter. She was calling to me saying she needed help. I got up, got my truck, drove here. And then," she trailed off, eyes widening. "I don't remember anything else." Hosea had his radio out, calling for medical support, but Truxton knew what the doctor would say. Dehydration, exhaustion, possible psychotic break. They'd sedate her, keep her for observation, run tests that would show nothing unusual. And meanwhile, the real question would remain unanswered. What had brought her here? What was she hearing or seeing that pulled her back to this place? He was about to ask when Nadine grabbed his arm, fingers digging in with surprising strength. "Look," she whispered, pointing at the canyon wall above the symbols. Truxton followed her gesture and felt his breath catch. There, where there had been nothing before, new marks had appeared. Fresh scratches in the stone barely visible in the afternoon light. They formed a pattern, geometric and deliberate, different from the old symbols but clearly related to them. "Those weren't there yesterday," Hosea said quietly. "No," Truxton agreed. "They weren't." They photographed the new marks from every angle, documenting their position relative to the old symbols. Then Hosea noticed something else. A small pile of stones at the base of the wall directly beneath the fresh scratches. The stones were arranged in a spiral pattern, each one carefully placed. "Another cairn," he said. "Someone built this recently, very recently." "While we were gone," Truxton said. "Sometime between yesterday afternoon and now." They searched the surrounding area, looking for any sign of who or what had created the marks in the cairn. They found nothing. No footprints, no tool marks, no evidence that anyone had been there at all. By the time the medical team arrived, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. They loaded Nadine into the ambulance, still confused and disoriented, and drove away with lights flashing. Truxton and Hosea remained behind, standing in the center of the box canyon as shadows lengthened around them. "This is getting bigger," Hosea said. "Whatever this is, it's not stopping, it's escalating." Truxton nodded slowly. "We need help. Someone who knows more than we do about this area, about the history. Someone who can make sense of what we're seeing." "I know someone," Hosea said after a moment. "Traditional healer, lives up near Sile. He's old, been around longer than anyone I know. If there are stories about this place, he'll know them. Can you set up a meeting?" "I'll try. But Truxton, you need to understand something. If we go down this road, if we start asking these questions, we might not like the answers we get. Some knowledge comes with a price." "I know," Truxton said. "But we can't just let this go. People are disappearing, and we're supposed to protect them. If there's even a chance we can stop it, we have to try." Hosea looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll make the call tonight. But we do this properly, with respect. We're asking for help, not demanding answers." They drove back to Chinle as dusk settled over the desert, the sky turning purple and gold. At the station, May was waiting with more files, more old cases that might or might not be connected. Truxton took them gratefully and sat down to read, knowing he wouldn't sleep again tonight. The files painted a picture that grew more disturbing with each page. Disappearances going back decades, maybe longer. Always the same area, always people alone at night. Always vehicles found abandoned with no explanation. And in the margins of some of the oldest reports, handwritten notes in faded ink that mentioned marks on stone and places where the land felt wrong. At midnight, Truxton was still reading when his phone rang. It was Hosea. "I talked to my contact," the sergeant said without preamble. "He'll meet with us tomorrow afternoon at his place. But he had a warning. He said we need to be very careful about what we're looking for because some things look back." "What does that mean?" "I don't know, but we'll find out tomorrow." Truxton hung up and stared at the files spread across his desk. Somewhere out in the dark, something was walking. Something that left tracks and marks and took people who never came home. And now he'd committed to pursuing it, to following the trail wherever it led. He thought about Nadine standing in that canyon, eyes unfocused, whispering about things waiting. He thought about the fresh marks on stone and the cairn that had appeared from nowhere. And he wondered if May had been right, if the not knowing might have been safer after all. But it was too late for that now. He'd seen too much, asked too many questions. All he could do was keep moving forward and hope that whatever answers they found were ones they could live with. Outside his window, the night pressed close and silent, full of secrets it would not easily give up. The drive to Tsile took them north through country that seemed to fold in on itself, the road climbing through pine forests that gave way to open meadows before plunging back into shadow. Truxton rode in silence beside Hosea, watching the landscape change and feeling the weight of what they were doing settle deeper into his bones. They were crossing a line, moving from the realm of police work into something older and less certain. The healer's place was a small house set back from the main road, surrounded by tall pines that filtered the afternoon light into dappled patterns on the ground. Smoke rose from a chimney, carrying the scent of juniper and something else Truxton couldn't identify. They parked and sat for a moment, neither man eager to be the first to step out. "Let me do the talking," Hosea said finally. "Show respect, accept what's offered, don't ask questions until he's ready to answer them." Truxton nodded. They climbed out and walked up a path of smooth stones to the front door. Before they could knock, it opened, revealing an old man with a face like carved wood and eyes that seemed to look through rather than at them. "Hosea Begedy," the old man said, his voice surprisingly strong. "It's been a long time." "Too long, Uncle. Thank you for seeing us." The old man's gaze shifted to Truxton. "And you bring a young officer who's seen things he doesn't understand." It wasn't a question. Truxton felt exposed under that steady gaze, as though every doubt and fear he carried was visible. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. The old man nodded and stepped back. "Come in, we have much to discuss." The interior was dim and warm, heated by a fire crackling in a stone hearth. The walls were lined with shelves holding jars and bundles of dried plants, their labels written in both English and Navajo. The old man gestured to a worn sofa and two chairs arranged around a low table. "Sit," he said. "I'll make tea." They sat while he worked at a small stove in the corner, heating water and adding leaves from one of his jars. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt purposeful, like a space being cleared for important words. When the tea was ready, the old man poured 3 cups and set them on the table before settling into his chair with a sigh. He picked up his cup and inhaled the steam, eyes closed. "Drink," he said. "Then we'll talk." The tea was bitter and complex with flavors Truxton couldn't name. He sipped it slowly, feeling warmth spread through his chest. Across from him, the old man watched with those penetrating eyes. "You've found marks on stone," the old man said when Truxton had drunk half his cup. "Old symbols, and new ones appearing where they shouldn't." "Yes, sir," Truxton said. "How did you know?" "Because this has happened before. Not in my lifetime, but in my grandfather's and his grandfather's before him. The marks appear, people disappear, and then after a time it stops. Until the next cycle." Hosea leaned forward. "What causes it, Uncle?" The old man was quiet for a long time, staring into his tea as though reading something in its depths. "There are places," he said finally, "where the boundary between worlds grows thin. Most of the time, that boundary holds. But sometimes, when conditions are right, it weakens. Things slip through. Or things that were always there become visible to those who aren't meant to see them." "What kind of things?" Truxton asked. "Old things. Things that walked these lands before the people came, before the stars were set in their places. They don't think like we do, don't want what we want. They exist in a way we can't fully comprehend. And when they notice us, when they become aware of our presence, they respond in ways that seem random but follow their own logic." Truxton thought about the tracks ending in empty circles, about Nadine standing transfixed in the canyon. The people who disappear, are they taken? Sometimes. Sometimes they wander into places they shouldn't and become lost. Sometimes they're chosen, though I don't know the criteria. Your missing woman, the one you found in the desert, she wasn't taken. She was shown something, given a message. What message? The old man shook his head. That's not for me to say. It was meant for her. But the fact that she saw it and survived means something. Usually those who see don't come back. Hosea set down his cup carefully. Is there a way to stop it? To close whatever boundary has opened? Perhaps. But it would require knowing exactly where the boundary is weakest and what keeps it open. The marks you found, they're not warnings, they're anchors, places where the two worlds touch. Destroy them, and you might close the door. Or you might make it worse. How would we make it worse? Truxton asked. By drawing attention, by showing that we know what's happening and are actively opposing it. Right now, you're observers. You've seen the marks, followed the tracks, but you haven't interfered. The moment you do, you become participants, and participants can become targets. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Truxton thought about May's warning that some knowledge came with a price. He was beginning to understand what she'd meant. "What would you advise, Uncle?" Hosea asked. The old man stood and walked to one of his shelves, running his fingers along jars until he found what he was looking for. He pulled down a small leather pouch and brought it back to the table. "You're going to keep investigating," he said. "I can see it in both of you. So I'll give you protection, such as it is." He opened the pouch and poured its contents onto the table. 4 small stones, each one marked with a symbol painted in white. "These are boundary markers," he said. "Place them at the 4 cardinal points around any area you need to search, and they'll create a space of safety. Whatever walks out there won't be able to cross that boundary easily. It won't stop them if they truly want to reach you, but it will slow them down, give you warning." Truxton reached out and picked up one of the stones. It was smooth and surprisingly warm, almost pulsing against his palm. "How do they work?" "Faith and intention. You must believe they'll protect you, and you must place them with purpose. and when you're done, you must gather them up and return them to neutral ground. Leaving them creates a permanent barrier, which will anger what you're trying to avoid. What if we want to close the boundary permanently? Truxton asked. What if we want to stop this from happening again? The old man's expression grew grave. Then you would need to find the source, the original mark from which all others spring. And you would need to unmake it, which is far more dangerous than simply observing. I don't recommend that path. But it's possible? Possible, yes. Survivable, less certain. They talked for another hour, the old man sharing stories his grandfather had told him about the disappearances of the past. Always the same pattern, always the same area. People would vanish for a season, maybe two, and then it would stop. The marks would fade, the tracks would disappear, and life would return to normal until the next time. How long does each cycle last? Hosea asked. Months, usually, sometimes a year. The longest on record was 3 years back in the 1870s. 23 people disappeared during that time. Then, one day it simply stopped. What ended it? No one knows. Some say a medicine man found the source and sealed it. Others say it ended on its own, that whatever was causing it lost interest or moved on. There's no way to be certain. As the afternoon wore on toward evening, the old man walked them back to the door. He placed a hand on Truxton's shoulder, his grip surprisingly strong. You have a good heart, he said, but be careful that your desire to help doesn't lead you somewhere you can't return from. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. I understand, Truxton said, though he wasn't sure he did. Do you? Then answer me this. If you had to choose between saving one person and protecting yourself, which would you choose? Truxton opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. It should have been simple, the answer drilled into him from his first day of training. Protect yourself first because you can't help anyone if you're dead. But standing here in this doorway, thinking about Nadine and her missing daughter and all the others who'd vanished over the years, the answer didn't feel so clear. I don't know, he admitted finally. The old man nodded. That's an honest answer. Remember it when the time comes to decide. They drove back to Chinley in silence, both men processing what they'd learned. Truxton kept one hand in his pocket, fingers wrapped around the warm stone the old man had given him. It felt real and solid, an anchor in a world that had become increasingly strange. At the station, May was waiting with news. Nadine Tallsalt is back at the hospital, she said. Checked herself in voluntarily this time, asking for psychiatric evaluation. Doctor says she's coherent but claims she's been having visions, seeing her daughter in her dreams. Is she asking for us? Truxton asked. No, she specifically said she doesn't want to see any police, says we can't help her with what she's dealing with. Truxton felt a pang of frustration, but also understanding. Maybe Nadine was right. Maybe this was beyond what they could handle with standard procedures and protocol. He spent the rest of the evening reviewing all the evidence they'd gathered, laying out photographs and notes in chronological order. The pattern was there, clear and undeniable. Something was operating in that stretch of desert. Something that left marks and took people and followed its own incomprehensible logic. At midnight, he was still at his desk when Hosea appeared in the doorway. Go, May, the sergeant said. Get some sleep. We'll start fresh tomorrow. I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see those symbols. Then come with me. There's something I want to show you. They drove east out of Chinley, away from the areas they'd been searching, into country that rose toward the base of the Defiance Plateau. The road climbed through darkness, headlights catching the eyes of animals that scattered before them. After 20 minutes, Hosea pulled off onto a dirt track that led to a small overlook. They got out and stood at the edge, looking down over the valley spread below. From here, they could see the lights of Chinle in the distance, and beyond it the vast darkness of the desert stretching to the horizon. The stars overhead were brilliant, undimmed by any competing light. "My grandfather brought me here when I was young," Hosea said. "Taught me to read the land, to understand that what we see is only a small part of what's actually there. He said the Navajo people have always known that there are other worlds alongside ours, places we can't perceive directly, but that influence everything we do." "Do you believe that?" Truxton asked. "I believe there's more to reality than what we can measure and document. I believe our ancestors weren't fools when they taught us to treat certain places with respect and caution. And I believe that sometimes the best thing we can do is acknowledge our limitations." "So you think we should stop investigating?" Hosea was quiet for a moment. "No," he said finally. "I think we should continue, but with humility. We're not going to solve this like a normal case. We're not going to catch someone and put them in handcuffs. The best we can hope for is to understand it well enough to protect people, to warn them away from dangerous areas. That's not justice. No, it's not. But it might be all we can achieve." They stood in silence, watching the stars wheel overhead and listening to the night sounds of the desert. Somewhere out there, in one of those dark valleys, something walked. Something old and strange and utterly beyond their ability to control. All they could do was mark its passage, document its presence, and hope that when it took notice of them, they'd be ready. The next morning brought a new development. A truck driver called in a report of seeing someone walking alongside US 191 near mile marker 47, the same area where Rita Nez had disappeared decades before. The figure had been walking north, the driver said, moving with a strange gait that didn't look quite right. When the driver slowed to offer help, the figure had simply vanished into the darkness between one heartbeat and the next. Truxton took the call himself, documenting every detail. The driver was a middle-aged man from Farmington, a regular on this route who'd driven it hundreds of times. He was shaken but coherent, adamant about what he'd seen. "I know how it sounds," the driver said. "But I'm telling you, 1 second there was someone there, next second nothing. And the way it moved, it wasn't natural, like it was gliding more than walking." Truxton thanked him and hung up, then pulled out the map Hosea had marked with all the historical disappearances. Mile marker 47 fell right in the center of the pattern, the point where multiple incidents clustered together. He radioed Hosea. "We need to check that area again. Daylight, full documentation." "Agreed. I'll meet you there in 30 minutes. They spent the afternoon searching the area around mile marker 47, working in a grid pattern with the boundary stones placed at cardinal points. The stones did seem to create a sense of safety, a bubble of normalcy in otherwise unsettling country. Within their boundaries, Truxton felt calm and focused. Outside them, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. They found more tracks, similar to the ones from before, but fresher. And in a small wash hidden from the road, they found something else. A torn piece of cloth, faded blue denim, caught on a thorn bush. Truxton bagged it carefully, noting the location and condition. "This could be from anyone," Hosea said. "Hikers, hunters, anyone who passed through. Or it could be from one of the missing people." Truxton turned the bag in his hands, examining the fabric through the plastic. "We should compare it to the descriptions in the old case files." Back at the station, they did exactly that. And in Rita Nez's file, they found a description of what she'd been wearing the night she disappeared. Blue jeans, white shirt, brown jacket. The denim matched. "It's been 50 years, Truxton said, staring at the scrap of cloth. "This fabric shouldn't still exist, not exposed to the elements all this time." "Unless it hasn't been there all this time," Hosea replied quietly. "Unless it appeared recently." The implication was clear and disturbing. Somehow, evidence from a 50-year-old disappearance was showing up fresh, as though the event had just occurred. The boundary between past and present was blurring in the same way the boundary between worlds seemed to be. That night, Truxton dreamed of walking through the desert following parallel tracks that stretched to the horizon. In the dream, he could see figures ahead of him walking in single file, but every time he got close enough to make out details, they flickered and vanished like heat shimmer. He woke before dawn, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, with the absolute conviction that he'd been somewhere real. The feeling persisted through the morning, a certainty that his dream had been more than simple imagination. He couldn't shake the sense that he'd actually walked those tracks, had actually seen those figures, even though his rational mind insisted it was impossible. At the station, May took one look at him and pointed to the coffee pot without speaking. He poured himself a cup and sat heavily in his chair, the dream still vivid behind his eyes. "You're pushing too hard," May said from her desk. "This case is getting inside your head. It's already there. I can't let it go." "Maybe that's the problem. Maybe you're not supposed to solve it. Maybe you're just supposed to document it and move on." "People are disappearing, May. I can't just document that and move on." She looked at him steadily. "No one's disappeared in the last 3 days. Whatever was happening might have stopped on its own. Or it's just paused, waiting. For what? I don't know. That's what scares me." The day passed in a blur of paperwork and phone calls, but Truxton's mind was elsewhere, circling around the problem like water around a drain. That evening, he found himself driving back out to the area around mile marker 47, unable to stay away. He told himself it was just a patrol, a routine check, but he knew it was more than that. He was being drawn back, pulled by the same force that had pulled Nadine back to the canyon, and he wondered if he was strong enough to resist it, or if he even wanted to. The sun was setting when he pulled off the road at the exact spot where they'd found the torn denim. He got out and stood in the fading light, listening to the desert sounds around him. Wind in the sage, the distant call of a raven, the tick of his cooling engine. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening, but as darkness fell, he heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the direction of the wash. He turned, hand moving to his flashlight, and saw a figure approaching through the twilight. It walked with that strange gliding gait the truck driver had described, not quite natural, not quite human. Truxton's heart hammered as the figure drew closer. He should get in his truck and leave, should radio for backup, should do any number of things that training and common sense dictated. Instead, he stood his ground and waited. The figure stopped 20 feet away, at the edge of where the light from his truck's headlights reached. It was tall and thin, dressed in what looked like old clothes, its face shadowed and indistinct. They regarded each other across that small distance, human and something other, while the desert held its breath around them. Then the figure spoke, its voice like wind across stone. "You've been looking for us." Truxton found his voice, though it came out rougher than he'd intended. "Who are you?" "We are what remains, what has always been here. You call us walkers, stalkers, things in the night. We have no name for ourselves. What do you want?" "Nothing from you. We simply exist, as we always have. It's your people who have forgotten how to coexist with what they cannot see." "The missing people, did you take them?" "Some found their way to us. Some were claimed by the land itself. The boundary is thin here, and has been for longer than your people have walked upright. Those who cross it rarely return. Can they be brought back? The figure was silent for a long moment. Would you want them back, changed as they would be? Having seen what lies beyond, some knowledge breaks the mind that holds it. Truxton thought of Nadine, transfixed in the canyon, whispering about things that waited. Is there a way to close the boundary? To protect people from crossing? The boundary closes itself when it's ready. Trying to force it would only make things worse. Your best protection is knowledge and respect. Mark the dangerous places, teach your people to recognize the signs, and most will be safe. And the ones who aren't? They were always meant to cross. It's not cruelty, not hunger, it's simply the nature of things. The figure began to fade, dissolving into shadow like smoke dissipating on the wind. Truxton lunged forward, desperate to keep it there, to ask the 1,000 questions burning in his mind. But it was gone, leaving only darkness and the sound of wind across empty land. He stood alone in the night, trembling with the enormity of what had just happened. He'd spoken to something, had a conversation that should have been impossible, and he had no proof, no evidence beyond his own memory and the absolute certainty that it had been real. When he finally drove back to Chinle, dawn was breaking. At the station, he sat down and wrote a report of what had occurred, documenting every word of the exchange exactly as it had happened. He sealed it in an envelope and handed it to May without explanation. "File this," he said, "and if anything happens to me, make sure it gets read." She took the envelope, her expression unreadable. "You okay, Truxton?" "No," he said honestly, "but I will be." He went home and slept for 12 hours, dreamless for the first time in days. When he woke, the world felt clearer, his purpose more defined. He couldn't stop the disappearances, couldn't close a boundary that operated by rules he didn't understand. But he could document it, could mark the dangerous places and warn people away. He could be a watchman, standing between his people and something they couldn't comprehend. It wasn't the heroic solution he'd hoped for. It wasn't justice in any conventional sense. But it was something, a way to matter in the face of forces beyond his control. And for now, that would have to be enough. 3 weeks passed in a strange kind of calm. The disappearances stopped, the strange footprints ceased appearing, and the symbols on the canyon walls showed no new additions. Truxton continued his patrols along US 191, but the sense of watchful presence that had hung over the desert seemed to have faded, replaced by ordinary silence. He used the time to create a map, marking every location where incidents had occurred over the decades. Using the boundary stones the old man had given him, he established safe zones around the most active areas, placing warning markers at intervals along the roadside. They weren't official, just small cairns of stacked stones that looked natural enough but followed a pattern anyone familiar with the land would recognize as deliberate. May helped him compile a reference guide, a simple document that listed the historical incidents without interpretation or explanation. Just facts, dates, locations. She filed copies with the regional office and kept one in the station's emergency binder, marked for consultation in case of future disappearances. "You're making a handbook for something that can't be explained," she said one afternoon as they reviewed the final draft. "I'm making a record," Truxton replied, "so the next person who encounters this won't be starting from nothing. So they'll know they're not crazy, that this has happened before. And if it never happens again, then someone will find these files in 50 years and wonder what we were thinking. But at least the information will be there." Hosea spent those weeks following up on the old cases, trying to bring some closure to families who'd lost people decades ago. Most of the original family members were gone themselves, but there were grandchildren, nieces, nephews who remembered stories of relatives who'd vanished. He visited them one by one, explaining gently that there were no new leads but that the cases remained open, that their loved ones hadn't been forgotten. It was quiet work, unglamorous, the kind of thing that never made reports or earned commendations. But Truxton saw how it affected Hosea, saw the weight he carried in those conversations. Each family deserved to know that someone still cared, even if there were no answers to give. Nadine Tallsalt was released from the hospital after 2 weeks of evaluation. The doctors found nothing physically wrong with her, and the psychiatric assessment concluded she'd experienced a severe stress reaction to trauma, but was no danger to herself or others. She went home to Luka Chukai and, according to follow-up calls, resumed her normal life as though nothing had happened. Truxton visited her once, driving up to her small house on a cool morning when the aspens were just beginning to turn gold. She met him on the porch, coffee mug in hand, and they sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes before speaking. "How are you doing?" he asked finally. "Better? The dreams have stopped. I sleep through the night now." She sipped her coffee, eyes distant. "I don't remember much about that night in the canyon. Just fragments, feelings, like trying to remember a dream after you've been awake too long. Maybe that's for the best. Maybe." She looked at him directly. "Did you find what you were looking for out there?" "I found something. I'm not sure it's what I was looking for, but it's something." She nodded slowly. "My grandmother used to tell me that some questions aren't meant to be answered, just acknowledged. I think I understand that now." "Your daughter," Truxton began carefully. "Do you still—" "I let her go," Nadine said softly. "Whatever I saw that night, whatever pulled me out into the desert, it gave me permission to stop searching, to accept that she's gone, and I won't find her. That might not sound like much, but it's everything." Truxton understood. Sometimes the best outcome wasn't solving the mystery, but finding a way to live with it. He finished his coffee and stood to leave, but Nadine stopped him with a hand on his arm. "Thank you," she said, "for not dismissing what I told you, even when it sounded crazy, for taking it seriously. It's my job to take people seriously. It's more than that, and you know it. You could have written me off as delusional, filed a report, and forgotten about it. But you didn't. You followed where it led, even though it took you to uncomfortable places." After he left, Truxton drove slowly back toward Chinley, thinking about what she'd said. The case was still open technically, all those disappearances unsolved and likely to remain that way. But something had shifted. Some understanding had been reached. The boundary was still there, still thin in certain places, but it wasn't actively pulling people across. For now, at least, an equilibrium had been achieved. The 4th week brought a visitor to the station, an agent from the Bureau of Indian Affairs who'd read the reports Truxton and Hosea had filed. He was young, fresh out of training, with the kind of confidence that came from not yet having encountered something that couldn't be explained by procedure and policy. "I'm here to review the multiple missing persons cases you've reported," he said, spreading files across the conference table. "Quite a cluster of incidents in a concentrated area. We're considering bringing in additional resources, maybe a specialized search team." Truxton and Hosea exchanged glances. "That won't be necessary," Hosea said carefully. "The situation has stabilized." "Stabilized how? These cases are still unsolved. Don't you want to find answers?" "We have the answers we're going to get," Truxton said. "What we need now isn't more investigation. It's better prevention. Warning signs, education, making sure people understand the risks of that particular stretch of road." The agent frowned. "What risks, specifically?" I've read your reports and they're thorough on documentation but vague on causation. What exactly do you think is happening out there?" Truxton chose his words carefully. "The area has a history of disappearances going back over a century. We've documented patterns, marked dangerous zones, and established protocols for responding to future incidents. We believe the best use of resources is maintaining awareness and quick response capability, not extensive search operations that historically haven't yielded results." "It sounds like giving up." "It sounds like accepting limitations," Hosea said quietly. "Sometimes that's the wisest course of action." The agent wasn't satisfied, but he also couldn't argue with the data they'd compiled. The disappearances had stopped, the reports were thorough, and there were no active complaints from families demanding further investigation. He left with promises to review the situation and determine appropriate next steps, which both Truxton and Hosea knew meant the files would be archived and forgotten until the next incident occurred. "Think he'll push it higher up?" Truxton asked, after the agent had gone. "For a while, maybe. But eventually, he'll encounter something else that seems more urgent, more solvable. Our reports will become part of the background noise. Is that what we want?" Hosea considered. "Yes, I think it is. The more attention we draw, the more people will go out there looking for answers, and some of them won't come back. Better to let it fade into background noise, just another unexplained quirk of the desert." That evening, Truxton found himself drawn back to the canyon one last time. He told himself it was just to check the boundary stones, to make sure they were still properly placed, but he knew it was more than that. He needed to see the place again, to confirm in his own mind that it was just a box canyon, just rocks and sand with no special significance beyond what people brought to it. He arrived at sunset, the light turning the canyon walls to amber and gold. The symbols were still there, old and new, carved into stone that had stood for millennia. The circle of disturbed earth in the center had been smoothed by wind, but he could still make out its rough outline. He stood in the center and turned slowly, taking in the full sweep of the canyon. It felt different now, less charged, less watchful, as though whatever presence had inhabited this place had withdrawn, satisfied or simply no longer interested. From his pocket he pulled out the 4 boundary stones the old man had given him. He'd been carrying them ever since that meeting, and they'd become familiar weights, talismans against uncertainty. Now, following the old man's instructions, he placed them at the cardinal points around the canyon, speaking a simple prayer at each placement. When he was done, he stood again in the center and felt the difference immediately. The space within the boundary stones felt separate, sealed off from whatever lay beyond. Not safe exactly, but neutral. A place where the two worlds touched but didn't mix. He stayed until full dark, watching stars emerge overhead and listening to the night sounds of the desert. At some point, he became aware of a presence at the edge of his vision. Something standing just beyond the boundary stones. He didn't turn to look at it directly, just acknowledged it with a small nod. "Thank you," he said quietly, not sure if he was addressing the presence or the land itself or some combination of both, for the understanding. The presence remained for a moment longer, then faded like smoke. Truxton gathered up the boundary stones and walked back to his truck, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. The case wasn't closed, would never be fully closed, but it had reached a resolution of sorts. An acceptance that some mysteries existed beyond human comprehension, and the best response was respect rather than solution. Back at the station, he filed his final report. It was brief, just a few paragraphs noting that the recent cluster of incidents appeared to have ceased, that preventive measures had been implemented, and that continued monitoring was recommended. He attached the reference guide he and May had compiled, marked it for archival, and signed his name at the bottom. May read it over his shoulder. That's it? That's how we close out multiple missing persons cases. Unless you have a better suggestion. She was quiet for a moment. No, she said finally. I think you're right. Sometimes you have to accept that closure isn't the same as solving. You've done good work on this, Truxton. Both of you have. Hosea appeared in the doorway. Regional office just called. They're satisfied with our documentation and are closing active investigation on all historical cases. They'll remain in the system as cold cases, but no further resources will be allocated unless new incidents occur. So we're done, Truxton said. We're done with the official investigation, but the real work continues. Monitoring, maintaining awareness, being ready if it starts again. Hosea pulled out a chair and sat. I spoke to the old man in Siley. He said the boundary will stay quiet now for a long time, maybe decades. What happened was a small opening, a brief moment when conditions aligned. It's closed now, or as closed as it gets. What changed? Truxton asked. What made it close? He wasn't entirely clear on that, but he suggested that acknowledgement was part of it. That by seeing what was happening and treating it with respect rather than trying to force an explanation, we satisfied something, gave it the recognition it required. May snorted softly. So, we solved the case by not solving it? In a way, yes. They sat in silence, three people who'd stared into something beyond normal experience and come away changed but intact. The station around them felt ordinary again. Just a small building in a small town where ordinary crimes occurred and were handled through ordinary means. But they knew better now. They knew that beneath the surface of the ordinary, strange currents flowed. That the world was larger and stranger than reports and procedures could capture. And that sometimes the best police work wasn't catching perpetrators or closing cases, but simply bearing witness to what occurred and keeping others safe from stumbling into the same darkness unprepared. Over the following months, life returned to normal. Truxton continued his patrols, responding to domestic calls and traffic incidents and all the mundane emergencies that made up most of police work. But he kept the boundary stones in his truck, and he maintained the warning cairns along the dangerous stretches of highway, rebuilding them when weather or time knocked them down. Hosea began training younger officers, passing on not just official procedure but the deeper knowledge he'd gained. How to read the land, how to recognize when something felt wrong, how to trust instinct even when it contradicted logic. He never spoke directly about what they'd encountered, but he wove the lessons into his teaching until they became part of the foundation of how those officers approached their work. May compiled a second edition of the reference guide, expanded with additional historical research and detailed maps. She distributed copies to stations throughout the region, marked as reference material for unexplained incidents. Most recipients probably filed them away without reading, but a few called to ask questions, to share their own strange encounters. A network of knowledge began to form, unofficial and undocumented, passed along through careful conversations and knowing looks. A year after the incidents, Truxton received a letter from Nadine. It was brief, just a few lines thanking him again and letting him know she was doing well. She'd gotten a job at the school in Luka Chukai, teaching children about traditional stories and the importance of respecting sacred places. She didn't mention her daughter, didn't reference that night in the desert. Just a simple update from one acquaintance to another. He wrote back, equally brief, expressing his pleasure at her recovery and wishing her well. He didn't mention the canyon or the symbols or any of it. Some things were better left unspoken, acknowledged through silence rather than words. 2 years later, on a cold October night, May called Truxton at home. "We've got a report," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Vehicle found abandoned on US 191, mile marker 48. Driver nowhere to be found. Truxton felt his stomach tighten. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Hosea's already en route. He said to bring the stones." He grabbed his gear and the leather pouch containing the boundary stones and drove through darkness to the highway. His headlights caught Hosea's truck already pulled over, the sergeant standing beside an abandoned sedan with its door hanging open. They didn't speak as Truxton approached, just exchanged a look that conveyed everything necessary. It was happening again, the cycle beginning anew. But this time they were prepared, armed with knowledge and respect, and the understanding that some battles weren't about winning, but about maintaining vigilance. Together they placed the boundary stones around the search area, establishing a safe perimeter. They documented the vehicle, noted the tracks leading away into darkness, photographed everything with meticulous care. And when the sun rose and a search team arrived from Chinle, they briefed them on proper procedure, on the importance of not pursuing tracks too far, on recognizing when to pull back. The driver was never found. The case joined the others in the archive. One more notation in the ongoing record of disappearances along that stretch of desert highway. But there was no panic, no media frenzy, no demands for explanation. Just quiet acknowledgement that this place, this land, operated by its own rules and demanded respect rather than understanding. Standing in the pre-dawn light beside Hosea, watching the search team work within the boundaries they'd established, Truxton felt something settle in his chest. Not satisfaction exactly, but acceptance. They couldn't stop this, couldn't prevent every disappearance or save every person who wandered into dangerous territory. But they could bear witness, could document and mark and warn, could stand as guardians between their people and forces beyond comprehension. "It never really ends, does it?" he said quietly. Hosea shook his head. "No, but we can make it less frequent, less devastating. We can give people a fighting chance. Is that enough? It has to be." The sun broke fully over the horizon, flooding the desert with golden light. The search team continued their careful grid pattern, staying within the boundary stones, following protocols that would keep them safe even if they didn't fully understand why. Somewhere out in that vast landscape, something walked. Something old and patient and utterly other. But here, within the stones, within the knowledge they'd gained and the respect they'd learned to show, there was a measure of protection. Not certainty, never certainty, but a chance, a hope, a small light against the encompassing dark. And for now, standing watch over a land that held mysteries they would never fully solve, that was enough. Truxton pulled out his notebook and began to write, documenting every detail with the same meticulous care he'd learned to apply. Each word was a small act of defiance against the unknowable, a testament that even in the face of forces beyond comprehension, human beings would continue to observe, to record, to bear witness. The search would continue until sunset, following established protocols. Then they would gather the boundary stones, mark the location for future reference, and file another report that would join all the others in the archive. The cycle would continue, as it had for generations, as it likely would for generations to come. But they would be here, watching and waiting, maintaining the vigil. Keepers of knowledge that couldn't be taught in any academy, guardians of a boundary that existed beyond any map. It wasn't the heroic work he'd imagined when he first put on the badge, but it was necessary work, important work. And as the sun climbed higher and the desert stretched endlessly in all directions, Truxton understood with perfect clarity that this was exactly where he was meant to be. Not solving mysteries, but standing guard over them. Not finding answers, but living with questions that had no answers. The land held its secrets, and he would let it. But he would also stand between those secrets and the people under his protection, would mark the dangerous places and warn the unwary and maintain the careful balance between worlds that should not touch. It was enough. It had to be enough. Because in the end, that was all any of them could do. Bear witness, stay vigilant, and hope that when the next traveler wandered into darkness, they would see the warning signs and choose another path. The desert wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and stone and ancient things. Truxton closed his notebook, tucked it away, and turned to help Hosea coordinate the search. There was work to do. There was always work to do. And somewhere out in the vast silence, something waited. Lieutenant Corvin Sin pressed his palm against the cool metal of the patrol unit's hood and counted to 10, forcing his breathing to slow. The radio crackled with static and distant voices, units checking in from across the Navajo Nation, but none of them were close enough to matter. Out here, 20 miles south of Shiprock on a gravel road that barely deserved the name, he was alone except for the rookie sitting rigid in the passenger seat. Officer Ira Claw was 3 weeks out of the academy, young enough that his uniform still held crisp creases and his boots hadn't yet picked up the red dust that eventually stained everything out here. He stared straight ahead through the windshield at the compound that sprawled across 5 acres of scrubland, his jaw working like he was chewing words he didn't dare speak. "Talk to me," Corvin said without looking at him. "Sir, the call said domestic disturbance. That's not what this is." "No, it's not." Corvin pulled a pair of binoculars from the door pocket and raised them to his eyes. Through the lenses, the compound came into sharp focus. 3 trailers arranged in a rough triangle, their metal siding weathered to gray. Between them, a cleared area where tire tracks and boot prints had worn the earth to hardpan. And at the center, blocking the only road in or out, a barricade of scrap lumber and chain-link fencing topped with coils of rusted barbed wire. Movement caught his eye. A figure emerged from the largest trailer, carrying something long and dark. Corvin adjusted the focus until the object resolved into clarity. A rifle, probably a .30-06 based on the profile, held loose and easy in practiced hands. "How many you count?" he asked, passing the binoculars to Ira. The rookie took them with hands that trembled slightly. He scanned the compound in silence, lips moving as he counted. 3 visible. 2 by the barricade, 1 on the porch of the far trailer. Could be more inside. Always are. Corvin took back the binoculars and studied the terrain. The compound sat at the base of a low mesa, its back against rock that rose in layered shelves of sandstone. No approach from that direction without climbing gear and time they didn't have. The front was all open ground, 400 yards of sage and sand with no cover except scattered rocks barely big enough to hide a jackrabbit. The call had come in 40 minutes ago, a woman's voice, tight with fear, reporting that her husband had barricaded himself in their home with their 2 children and was threatening anyone who approached. Dispatcher had given the address and noted previous calls to the location, all domestic in nature, all resolved without incident. Standard procedure said wait for backup, establish a perimeter, call in a negotiator. But when Corvin had radioed for support, the response had made his stomach sink. Nearest units were an hour out, tied up with a rollover on US 160. Regional negotiator was in Window Rock, minimum 2 hours away. He could wait, sit tight, and keep the situation contained until help arrived. Or he could try to talk to someone before whatever was building inside that compound reached critical mass. "We're going in," he said, making the decision with the same quiet certainty he'd learned over 20 years of wearing the badge. Not charging in, not forcing entry, but approaching close enough to make contact, to understand what they were dealing with. Ira swallowed hard enough that Corvin could hear it. "Sir, regulations say—" "I know what regulations say. I also know that regulations were written by people sitting in air-conditioned offices who've never had to watch a situation spiral out of control while they waited for backup that took too long to arrive. He pulled out his notebook and a pencil, both worn smooth by years of use. We're going to approach on foot, hands visible, weapons holstered. I'm going to try to establish dialogue. Your job is to stay 10 paces behind me, observe everything, and if this goes bad, get back to the unit and call for emergency response, understood? Yes, sir. And Ira, don't pull your weapon unless I tell you to. The moment we show firearms, this becomes something else. Right now, it's just 2 officers trying to help a family in crisis. They stepped out into afternoon heat that hit like a physical blow. The sun hung overhead in a sky bleached almost white, and heat waves shimmered off the hardpan, making the compound waver like a mirage. Corvin settled his hat firmly on his head and started walking, boots crunching on gravel with each deliberate step. The barricade grew larger as they approached. Up close, he could see it was more substantial than it had appeared through binoculars. Shipping pallets formed the base, stacked too high and reinforced with railroad ties scavenged from somewhere. Chain link panels were wired across the top, and someone had woven branches and strips of sheet metal through the links to create a wall that was mostly opaque. The barbed wire on top looked fresh, its barbs catching sunlight in bright points. 50 yards out, a voice called from behind the barricade. "That's far enough." Corvin stopped and raised both hands to shoulder height, palms out. "I'm Lieutenant Corvin Sin, Navajo Police. We got a call about a disturbance. I'm here to help, not to cause trouble. Don't need your help. Need you to turn around and go back where you came from." The voice was male, rough with stress and something else. Fear, maybe, or exhaustion. Corvin tried to place the accent, the cadence of the words. Local, definitely Diné, but with an edge that spoke of time spent elsewhere. Military, maybe, or prison. "Can't do that," Corvin said, keeping his voice level and calm. "Someone called us, which means someone in there is scared. I need to make sure everyone's safe before I can leave." "Everyone's fine. Call was a mistake." "Then let me see for myself. You come out, we talk face to face, I verify everyone's okay and we're done here. Simple as that." Silence. Corvin could hear wind in the sage, the tick of heat expanding metal somewhere in the compound. Beside him, Ira shifted his weight, and Corvin shot him a look that said, "Stay still." "You're not coming in here," the voice said finally, "and I'm not coming out there. So I guess we're at what you'd call an impasse. Don't have to be. I'm not here to arrest anyone, not here to force my way in. I just need to know that the people inside are safe. You got a phone in there? Can call someone, have them confirm everyone's okay? No phone, no contact, just leave us alone." Corvin tried a different angle. "The woman who called, she said there were children inside. That true?" A longer pause this time. When the voice came back, it was harder, more defensive. "My kids, my family, not your concern." "Kids make it my concern. That's the job, making sure children are safe. You can understand that. What I understand is you people don't care about us until something goes wrong. Where were you when the bank took our land? Where were you when the clinic turned us away because we couldn't pay? You show up now with your badges and your guns, acting like you're here to help, but all you want is to take what's left." There it was, the real issue bleeding through. This wasn't about a domestic disturbance or an isolated incident. This was about accumulation, about every grievance and injustice piling up until something finally broke. Corvin recognized it because he'd seen it before, had felt it himself in darker moments. The sense that the systems meant to protect you had failed so completely that the only option left was to wall yourself off and defend what little you still held. I hear you, he said quietly. And you're not wrong about a lot of that. Systems failed a lot of people, my own family included. But right now, in this moment, I'm not the system. I'm just one officer trying to make sure nobody gets hurt. Can we start there? Movement behind the barricade, shadows shifting. Then a section of chain link swung aside, revealing a gap barely wide enough for a person. The man who stepped through was in his 40s, lean and weathered, with close-cropped gray hair and eyes that tracked everything with military precision. He held the rifle low but ready, finger outside the trigger guard but close enough to matter. 10 feet, he said. You don't come closer than 10 feet. Corvin nodded and stopped walking, noting the distance carefully. Close enough to talk without shouting, far enough to give the man space. Appreciate you coming out. I'm Corvin, like I said. What's your name? Doesn't matter. Matters to me. Can't have a conversation if I don't know what to call you. The man considered this. Raymond, he said finally. Raymond Sosi. Corvin pulled out his notebook and wrote the name down, the gesture deliberate and visible. Thank you, Raymond. Now the woman who called, is she here? My wife. She's inside with the kids. She safe? Course she's safe. Told you everyone's fine. Then why'd she call us? Raymond's jaw tightened. Because she's scared. Doesn't understand what I'm trying to do here. Which is what, exactly? Protect what's ours. They want to take this land, want to push us off because we're behind on some payments. But this is our home. Our children's home. We got nowhere else to go. Corvin wrote that down too, his mind already working through the legal angles. Eviction proceedings took time, required court orders and proper notice. If Raymond was facing foreclosure, there were processes, appeals, ways to fight that didn't involve barricades and rifles. Who's trying to take the land? He asked. Bank in Farmington. Sent letters. Sent a man out here last week who said we had 30 days to vacate or they'd force removal. 30 days after my family's been on this land for 3 generations. You talk to a lawyer? Can't afford a lawyer. Can barely afford food. Raymond shifted the rifle slightly, not pointing it but making its presence clear. So, I figured they want this land. They're going to have to come through me to get it. Behind Corvin, Ira cleared his throat. Sir, maybe we should... Stay back, Corvin said without turning. To Raymond he continued, I understand you're angry. You got every right to be. But this, what you're doing now, this doesn't end well. Best case, you surrender peacefully and we work through the legal system. Worst case, someone gets hurt or killed, and then there's no coming back from that. Already tried the legal system. Went to the tribal office, filled out their forms, waited months for a hearing that got postponed 3 times. Meanwhile, the bank's lawyers are filing motions and setting deadlines, and I'm supposed to just smile and accept it? No, this is my line. I draw it here. Corvin could feel the situation crystallizing, possibilities narrowing toward a small set of outcomes, most of them bad. He needed to shift the dynamic, introduce something new that would create space for de-escalation. Your wife and kids, he said. They signed up for this line you're drawing? Raymond's expression flickered, certainty cracking for just a moment. They'll understand. Once this is over, once we've made our stand, they'll see it was necessary. Or they'll remember their father choosing a fight over their safety. Raymond, I've been doing this job a long time. I've seen how these situations play out. Man barricades himself, thinks he's protecting his family, but what he's really doing is putting them in the crossfire. That what you want for your kids? Don't talk about my kids, you don't know anything about them. You're right, I don't. So, tell me, how old are they? Raymond had hesitated, torn between defensive anger and the natural desire to talk about his children. 8 and 5, he said finally. Boy and a girl. What are their names? Why do you need to know that? Because they're part of this conversation, whether you like it or not. 8 and 5 years old, sitting inside that trailer, listening to their father argue with police. Wondering what's going to happen, scared, probably, maybe not understanding why any of this is necessary. They're fine. My wife's keeping them calm. For now. But how long can that last? How long before the stress gets to them? Before they start crying or acting out? And what happens when backup arrives, when we've got multiple units surrounding this place? That going to make them feel safer? Raymond's grip on the rifle tightened. You threatening me? Threatening my family? No. I'm trying to help you see that there's a way through this that doesn't involve traumatizing your children or putting everyone at risk. Let me talk to your wife, verify she and the kids are okay, and then we can discuss next steps. Maybe there's legal assistance available. Maybe we can contact the bank and negotiate an extension. But none of that happens if you stay behind that barricade with a rifle. For a long moment, Raymond said nothing, clearly wrestling with the decision. Corvin watched him carefully, reading the micro-expressions that flickered across his face. Fear and pride and desperate hope all battling for dominance. Then a new voice called from inside the compound. Raymond, please! A woman appeared at the gap in the barricade, younger than Raymond by maybe a decade, with long, dark hair pulled back in a hasty braid. Her face was streaked with tears, eyes red from crying. Please, just let them help. I can't do this anymore. The kids are terrified. Marie, go back inside. No. I'm done listening to you make decisions for all of us. You want to fight the bank, fine, but don't make the children part of it. She turned to Corvin, hands clasped in front of her like prayer. Please, officer, we didn't want any of this. I just want to take my kids and leave. Raymond spun toward her. Leave? This is our home. It's just land, Raymond. Land they're going to take anyway. I'd rather leave with our family intact than stay and watch you destroy yourself. The argument escalated quickly, both of them shouting now, old grievances spilling out in raw accusation. Corvin saw his opportunity and took it, moving forward 3 careful steps while their attention was divided. Raymond, Marie, please, he said, raising his voice just enough to cut through their argument. This isn't helping. Raymond, your wife is scared and wants to protect your children. That's not betrayal, that's love. And Marie, your husband is trying to save something important to your family. Both of you want the same thing. You're just seeing different paths to get there. They both turned to look at him, and in that moment of distraction, Corvin made his pitch. Here's what I propose. Marie, you and the kids come out. Go with Officer Clea here back to our unit where it's safe and calm. Raymond, you and I stay and talk. Figure out what options exist. No arrests, no forced entry, just conversation. Then we bring in someone from tribal legal services, someone who can actually help with the foreclosure issue. That seem reasonable? Marie looked at Raymond, hope and fear warring in her expression. Please, she whispered. For them. Raymond stood frozen, the rifle heavy in his hands. Corvin could see the exact moment the decision crystallized, see the tension drain from his shoulders in a way that made him simultaneously relieved and sad. The man was giving up, surrendering not to authority, but to exhaustion and the weight of responsibilities he couldn't carry alone. All right, Raymond said quietly. Marie and the kids go. But I stay, and we talk. You try anything. Try to rush me or bring more units in, and this is over. Understood. Corvin gestured to Ira. Officer Clea, help Mrs. Tsosi and the children to the unit. Get them water, make sure they're comfortable. Ira moved forward nervously, hands visible and movements slow. Marie disappeared back into the compound and emerged moments later leading two small children, both wide-eyed and silent. The boy clutched a toy truck. The girl held her mother's hand with both of her own. They filed through the gap in the barricade and walked toward Ira without speaking, their silence more damning than any accusation. Corvin watched them go, watched Ira guide them gently across the open ground toward safety, and felt the familiar ache that came with these situations. There were no winners here, just varying degrees of loss. Raymond would likely face charges, would certainly lose this land he'd tried so desperately to keep. Marie would have to rebuild somewhere else, would carry the trauma of this day for years. And the children would remember, would carry their own scars from watching their family fracture. But they were alive. They were safe. In this work, sometimes that was the only victory available. Raymond waited until his family was out of sight before speaking. "Now what?" "Now we talk," Corvin said. "You tell me your whole story, and I'll tell you honestly what options exist. Then we figure out how to end this without anyone getting hurt." "End it how?" "With me in handcuffs. Maybe. Maybe not. Depends on a lot of factors, including whether you did anything that rises to the level of criminal charges. Barricading your own property isn't necessarily illegal. Threatening law enforcement with a weapon is. Which way this goes depends partly on you." Raymond looked down at the rifle in his hands as though seeing it for the first time. "I never pointed it at anyone. Never even loaded it." He worked the action, showing the empty chamber. "Just wanted to look dangerous enough that they'd leave us alone. That worked, for a while. But now we're here and we need to find a way forward." Corvin gestured toward the barricade. "Mind if I come a little closer? Hard to have a real conversation shouting across 20 feet of desert." After a moment, Raymond nodded. Corvin, close, the distance T. Slowly, stopping just outside the comfortable arm's reach. Up close, he could see how exhausted the man was. The deep lines around his eyes and the tremor in his hands that spoke of sleepless nights and grinding stress. "When's the last time you ate?" Corvin asked. The question seemed to surprise Raymond. "This morning, maybe. I don't remember." "There's water and food in my unit. Let's sit down in the shade, have something to drink, and talk this through properly. You're not under arrest, Raymond. Not yet, anyway. But I need you to set the rifle down." Raymond looked at the weapon for a long moment, then carefully laid it on the ground and kicked it a few feet away. The gesture was both surrender and relief. The physical weight of the gun replaced by the emotional weight of what came next. They walked together to a spot of shade cast by the largest trailer's awning, where two folding chairs sat beside a makeshift fire pit. Corvin retrieved his canteen from his belt and offered it to Raymond, who drank deeply before handing it back. "All right," Corvin said, settling into one of the chairs. "Tell me the whole story, from the beginning. What happened to put you in this position?" And as Raymond began to talk, the words spilling out in a rush of frustration and fear and desperate hope, Corvin listened with the patience of someone who understood that sometimes the most important police work wasn't enforcement, but simply bearing witness to another person's pain. The sun tracked slowly across the sky as they talked, shadows lengthening across the compound. In the distance, Corvin could see Ira sitting with Marie and the children beside the patrol unit. Could imagine the quiet conversation happening there. The slow process of de-escalation and reassurance. This was the job, he thought. Not the dramatic confrontations or heroic rescues, but the careful, patient work of helping people navigate their worst moments. Of standing in the gap between crisis and resolution, offering whatever small assistance was possible. It wasn't always enough. Sometimes, despite every effort, situations spiraled beyond control. But today, at least, it had been enough to save a family from destroying itself. And for now, that had to be sufficient. The sun had shifted another hand's width across the sky by the time Corvin heard the second patrol unit approaching. He looked up from his notes to see dust rising from the access road, a vehicle moving faster than caution would normally recommend. Raymond tensed beside him, hand drifting toward where the rifle had been before remembering it was gone. "Easy," Corvin said quietly. "That'll be my backup, finally arriving, nothing to worry about. More police means more problems. Or it means more resources to help, depends on how we handle it." The unit pulled to a stop beside Corvin's vehicle, and two figures emerged. The first was Sergeant Billy Nez, a solid man in his 50s with a face like weathered stone and eyes that had seen everything twice. The second was a woman Corvin didn't recognize immediately, tall and lean with her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore civilian clothes, khaki pants, and a blue polo shirt with an ID badge clipped to her belt. Corvin stood and walked to meet them, leaving Raymond in the shade. "Billy," he said, offering his hand. "Corvin, heard you had a situation." Billy nodded toward the compound. "That resolved, or still active? Somewhere in between. Families safe, subjects cooperating, but we've got legal and logistical issues to work through." He turned to the woman. "Don't believe we've met." She extended her hand. "Shawnee Manymules, regional crisis negotiator out of Window Rock. Dispatch sent me when they got word of a barricade situation. Thought you were 2 hours out. I was in Shiprock for a training, lucky timing." She studied the compound with professional interest. "Talk me through what we've got." Corvin gave her the abbreviated version as they walked back toward Raymond. Subject barricaded with family due to foreclosure stress, wife and children evacuated safely. Subject cooperative but resistant to surrender, no weapons currently in his possession, but rifle nearby. Shawnee listened without interrupting, her expression neutral and assessing. Raymond stood when they approached, wariness clear in his posture. Corvin made introductions, watching carefully how the two measured each other. Shawnee offered her hand, and after a moment's hesitation Raymond shook it. "Mr. Tzosi," she said, her voice carrying a quality of calm authority that Corvin recognized as trained. "I appreciate your willingness to talk with Lieutenant Sin. That took courage, and it kept your family safe. That's the most important thing." Raymond's shoulders relaxed fractionally. "You here to arrest me?" "I'm here to help find a resolution that works for everyone. Lieutenant T. Sin told me about the foreclosure situation. That's outside my area of expertise, but I know people who specialize in housing advocacy. With your permission, I'd like to make some calls, see what options might be available." Already tried everything. Lawyers, tribal services, even went to a legal aid clinic in Farmington. They all said the same thing, that the bank followed proper procedure and there's nothing to be done. Maybe they're right, but maybe there's an angle that wasn't explored. And even if the land can't be saved, there might be assistance available for relocation, financial counseling, other resources. Shawnee pulled a small notepad from her pocket, the gesture so similar to Corvin's that he almost smiled. "Tell me about the timeline. When did you first get notice from the bank?" As Raymond recounted the story again, this time for Shawnee's benefit, Corvin stepped back and let her work. He'd been doing this long enough to recognize expertise when he saw it, and Shawnee had the gift. She asked questions that appeared simple, but were carefully designed to extract information, to build rapport, to make Raymond feel heard rather than interrogated. Billy joined him at the edge of the shade, voice low. "How's the rookie holding up?" Corvin glanced toward where Ira sat with Marie and the children. "Better than expected. He's green, but he follows instructions and keeps his head. Could have been worse. Could have been a lot worse." Heard the initial call came in as domestic violence. Wife was scared. Didn't know what else to say to get help. Raymond never touched her or the kids, just barricaded them in and refused to let anyone approach. Different kind of dangerous, but dangerous nonetheless. What's your read on him? He going to accept whatever resolution we work out, or is this going to escalate again? Corvin watched Raymond talking to Shawnee, saw the exhaustion in every line of his body. He's done fighting. Doesn't mean he'll surrender easily, but the fire's gone out. He made his stand, it didn't work, and now he's looking for a way to step down without losing face completely. Good, because I've got 3 more units staged 5 miles out, and the incident commander is eager to move in if needed. I've been holding them back, but that won't last forever. Give Shawnee an hour. If anyone can talk him into peaceful surrender, it's her. The hour stretched into 2 as Shawnee worked her way through Raymond's defenses. Corvin watched the process with professional admiration. She'd established rapport, identified his core concerns, and was now methodically addressing each one. Yes, the land was likely lost, but she had contacts at Native American Rights Fund who might review the case for procedural errors. Yes, he'd probably face charges, but cooperating fully now would weigh in his favor. Yes, his family would struggle, but there were support services, housing assistance, community resources. Each answer chipped away at Raymond's resistance, replacing desperation with something approaching hope. Not for the outcome he'd wanted, but for an outcome he could survive. "The thing is," Shawnee said at one point, her voice carrying clearly in the still air, "you've already won the most important battle. Your family is safe. Your children won't see their father hurt or killed by police. That's not nothing, Raymond. That's everything." Doesn't feel like winning. No, I imagine it doesn't. But ask yourself this, 20 years from now, what do you want your children to remember about today? Their father barricading them in a compound, refusing to surrender until force was necessary, or their father making the hard choice to put their well-being above his pride? Raymond was quiet for a long time. When you put it like that, I'm not trying to manipulate you. I'm trying to help you see past this moment to what comes after. And what comes after can be okay, can even be good, but only if we end this correctly. Corvin's radio crackled. "Lieutenant Sin, this is Incident Command. What's your status?" He stepped away before responding. "Situation stable. Negotiator is making progress. Request continued hold on tactical units." "Copy that. But be advised, we're losing daylight. If this isn't resolved in the next 90 minutes, we'll need to reassess approach." Meaning they'd move to a more aggressive posture, potentially forcing entry. Corvin understood the pressure, understood that resources couldn't be tied up indefinitely on a single incident. But he also knew that patience now could prevent violence later. Understood. We'll update in 60. He returned to find Shawnee standing, offering her hand to Raymond. "So, we're agreed. You'll surrender peacefully. We'll document the rifle was never loaded, and I'll make those calls about legal assistance." Raymond looked at her hand for a long moment before taking it. "Yeah, we're agreed." "Thank you. That took real courage." She turned to Corvin. "Lieutenant, can you help Mr. Tsosi gather any personal items he needs? I want to make sure he's comfortable during processing." Corvin nodded and followed Raymond into the trailer. The interior was cramped but neat, furnished with mismatched pieces that spoke of hard times and careful maintenance. Family photos covered one wall, documenting better days, happier moments. Raymond paused before them, hand hovering over a picture of Marie and the children at some birthday celebration. "Can I take this?" he asked quietly. "I don't see why not. Grab what you need for a couple days, just in case processing takes longer than expected." Raymond packed a small bag with mechanical efficiency, movements those of someone who'd done this before. Military or prison, Corvin thought again, watching how he rolled clothes tight and packed them in precise rows. The rifle was the only weapon visible, but Corvin made a point of checking other potential hiding spots anyway. Policy was policy, even in situations that felt more sad than dangerous. They emerged into late afternoon light that had gone golden, shadows stretching long across the compound. Shawnee had been busy while they were inside, coordinating with Billy and Ira to establish a clear procedure for the surrender. Raymond would walk out voluntarily, submit to a brief search for weapons, and be transported to Shiprock for processing. No handcuffs unless absolutely necessary. No perp walk for cameras that didn't exist out here anyway. Your wife and children are waiting by the patrol unit, Shawnee said as they approached. You want to say goodbye before we go? Raymond swallowed hard, the first real crack in his composure. Yeah, I'd like that. The walk across open ground felt longer than it had any right to. Corvin stayed close but not crowding, giving Raymond space while remaining ready to intervene if the situation changed. But the man's shoulders had rounded, defeat written in every line of his body. Whatever fight he'd carried into this day had been left behind in that trailer with the photographs of better times. Marie stood as they approached, the children pressed against her legs. Her expression was complicated, anger and relief and sorrow all mixed together in a way that defied simple categorization. Raymond stopped a few feet away, uncertain how to bridge the gap his actions had created. I'm sorry, he said finally, the words rough. I thought I was protecting you. Thought if I just stood firm, they'd back down and we could keep our home. I was wrong. You were scared, Marie replied quietly. We both were. But you can't protect us by putting us in danger, Raymond. You can't save our home by tearing our family apart. I know that now. He looked down at the children, who stared back with wide, uncertain eyes. Hey, guys. Daddy has to go away for a little while, but I need you to be strong for your mom, okay? Help her with whatever she needs. The little girl stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his leg, holding tight. Don't want you to go. I don't want to go either, sweetheart. But I have to. Made some mistakes and now I have to fix them. But I'll be back, I promise. He knelt down to her level, gently prying her arms loose so he could look into her face. You remember what I always tell you about promises. Keep them no matter what, she whispered. That's right, and I promise I'll come back. Might take a little while, but I will. Can you be patient for me? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Raymond pulled her into a hug, then extended an arm to draw the boy in as well. For a long moment, they stayed like that, a family tableau frozen against the backdrop of a compound that had become a prison of their own making. When Raymond finally stood, his own eyes were wet. He looked at Marie and something passed between them that needed no words. Understanding, maybe, or forgiveness, or just the shared acknowledgement of all they'd lost and all they still had. Take care of them, he said. Always. Marie's voice was steady despite the tears. And Raymond, get help, real help, for whatever's driving this, for us. He nodded, unable to speak, and turned to Corvin. I'm ready. The search was quick and professional, Corvin's hands efficient as they checked pockets and waistband. No weapons, no contraband, just the personal items Raymond had packed and a wallet containing $17 and expired identification. Billy brought his unit around and Raymond climbed into the back seat without resistance. Corvin leaned in before closing the door. For what it's worth, you did the right thing in the end. That counts for something. Does it? Raymond's laugh was bitter, still losing everything. You're keeping your family. In the long run, that's the only thing that really matters. He closed the door and stepped back as Billy pulled away, dust rising in the wake of the departing vehicle. Shawnee joined him, watching until the unit disappeared around a bend in the road. "Think he'll be okay?" she asked. "Eventually. He's got resources he doesn't know about yet, people willing to help. And he's got a family that still loves him, despite everything. That's more than a lot of people have." They spent the next hour securing the compound, documenting the barricade and the rifle for evidence, making sure the property was locked and noted. Marie elected to stay with her sister in Shiprock rather than return to the compound, at least until the legal situation was resolved. Ira drove her and the children, promising to help them get settled and connected with victim services. As the sun touched the western horizon, Corvin and Shawnee were the last ones on site. They stood in the center of what had been a battleground just hours before, now returned to quiet emptiness. "You handled that well," Shawnee said. "Not many officers would have had the patience to wait for negotiation, especially with a rookie as their only backup. Been doing this long enough to know that patience usually saves lives. Not always, but usually. Still, you took a risk approaching him alone before I arrived. Could have gone badly." "Could have, but it didn't." Corvin pulled out his notebook and flipped through as pages of notes he'd accumulated. "You meant what you said about making calls? About legal assistance?" "Absolutely. I've already got 3 contacts lined up to review his case. No guarantees, but they're good at finding angles others miss. And if they can't help, if the foreclosure stands, then we help him transition, find new housing, connect with financial counseling, make sure he doesn't end up homeless with 2 kids and nowhere to turn. That's when people get desperate enough to do something truly stupid." They walked back to their vehicles as dusk settled over the desert, the sky turning purple and gold. Corvin's radio crackled with traffic from other units, other incidents across the vast territory of the Navajo Nation. Someone's livestock was loose on the highway near Sanistee. A domestic dispute in Newcomb needed response. Life continued, crisis and resolution in constant rotation. "You ever get tired of it?" Shawnee asked as they reached his unit. "The constant struggle, the problems that don't really have solutions. Every day," Corvin admitted. "But then I think about what happens if we're not here to at least try. If people like Raymond have nowhere to turn when they're desperate. Yeah, the job is hard. Yeah, we can't fix everything. But we can fix some things, can prevent some tragedies. That's enough to keep me coming back." Spoken like someone who's been at this too long to quit. 23 years come November, too stubborn to do anything else at this point. She laughed and climbed into her own unit, offering a wave as she pulled away. Corvin sat in his vehicle for a few minutes, gathering his thoughts before beginning the drive back to Shiprock. The compound sat empty behind him, the barricade a dark silhouette against the deepening sky. He thought about Raymond, about Marie and the children, about all the ways a situation could have gone wrong and hadn't, about the thin line between tragedy and resolution, and how often it came down to patience and luck in roughly equal measure. His phone buzzed with a text from Ira. Family settled at sister's place. Kids doing okay, all things considered. Thank you for teaching me how to handle this. Corvin smiled and texted back. You did good work today. Get some rest. He started the engine and pulled onto the road, headlights cutting through gathering darkness. The drive back gave him time to decompress, to transition from the heightened awareness of crisis response back to normal functioning. He thought about the report he'd need to write, the follow-up that would be required, the chain of events that had been set in motion. But mostly he thought about Raymond's face when he'd hugged his children goodbye, about the weight of all the small decisions that had led to this moment, the missed payments and threatening letters, the pride that wouldn't let him ask for help until it was too late, the fear that drove him to build walls instead of bridges. It could have been anyone, Corvin reflected. In the right circumstances, with the right pressures, any of them could end up in Raymond's position. That's what made this work so heavy sometimes. The recognition that the line between law enforcement and lawbreaker was thinner than most people wanted to believe. The lights of Shiprock appeared ahead, a cluster of civilization against the dark expanse of the reservation. Corvin navigated to the station, parked in his usual spot, and sat for a moment longer before heading inside. The fluorescent lights of the building seemed harsh after hours in natural light, making him squint as he pushed through the door. The duty sergeant looked up from his desk. "Heard you had excitement today." "More like stress. Where'd they put Raymond Sosi?" "Interview room 2. Billy's starting the paperwork." Corvin found Billy hunched over forms, his handwriting cramped and deliberate. Raymond sat across from him, looking smaller somehow than he had at the compound. The fight had truly gone out of him, leaving only exhaustion and resignation. "How's he doing?" Corvin asked Billy quietly. "Cooperative. Gave a full statement, no lawyer requested. I'm recommending minimal charges, maybe just the barricade situation. Nothing about weapons since the rifle was never loaded or pointed." "What's the prosecutor likely to think?" "Depends on who catches the case. But given the circumstances, I think we can make a case for diversion or suspended sentence. He's not a danger to the community, just a desperate man who made poor choices." Corvin nodded and entered the interview room. Raymond looked up, something like hope flickering in his eyes. "Lieutenant, wanted to check on you before I head home. You need anything? Water? Food?" "I'm okay. Your sergeant's been fair." "Billy's good people. Listen, Raymond, I meant what I said earlier. You did the right thing surrendering peacefully. That's going to count in your favor as this process moves forward." "What happens now?" "Tonight, you'll be held here pending arraignment, probably tomorrow afternoon. Shawnee's already working on finding you representation, and she'll make sure your wife knows the schedule. After that, depends on a lot of factors, but my guess is you'll be released on your own recognizance while the case works through the system." "And the land?" Corvin pulled up a chair and sat. "That I can't help with. The foreclosure is a civil matter, outside police jurisdiction. But Shawnee gave you contacts, people who might be able to help. Use them. Don't give up just because one door closed." Raymond was quiet for a moment. "My father built the main trailer with his own hands. Took him 3 summers, working weekends and evenings after his regular job. I was maybe 10, helping him haul materials and hold boards steady while he nailed them. He said, 'This is yours someday. Take care of it. Pass it to your children.' And I couldn't even do that. Couldn't keep it safe for 1 generation. You know what your father would say if he were here? That I failed. No. He'd say family matters more than property. That you made the choice to protect your wife and children, even when it cost you everything else. That's not failure, Raymond. That's love." Tears slid down Raymond's face, silent and unchecked. "Doesn't feel like love. Feels like losing." "Yeah, it does. But love often feels like losing when you're in the middle of it. Give it time, talk to those lawyers, work with the system, let people help you. And most importantly, get help for yourself. The stress you're under, the fear and anger, it doesn't go away on its own. It needs addressing. I'll try. That's all anyone can ask." Corvin stood and offered his hand. "Good luck, Raymond. I hope things work out better than they seem right now." Raymond shook it, grip firm despite everything. "Thank you. For listening, for not just treating this like another call. Made a difference." Corvin left him there with Billy and walked out into the cool night air. His shift had officially ended 3 hours ago, but that was the nature of this work. Crisis didn't respect schedules. and resolution took however long it took. He drove home slowly, windows down to let in the night air. His small house sat dark and quiet, exactly as he'd left it that morning. Inside, he dropped his gear by the door and went straight to the kitchen, pulling out leftover fry bread and mutton stew his sister had brought by earlier in the week. As he ate, he thought about Ira's text, about teaching the rookie how to handle a crisis. What had he taught, really? Patience, maybe. The importance of listening. The recognition that every situation was unique. Every person deserving of individual consideration rather than just policy application. Would Ira remember those lessons in 6 months, a year, 10 years? Would they stick? Or would they be worn away by the daily grind of the job, by cynicism and exhaustion and the weight of all the problems that couldn't be fixed? Corvin didn't know. All he could do was model what he believed was right and hope it made a difference. He finished eating and sat at his small kitchen table, pulling out his notebook to begin the incident report. The words came slowly, each sentence a careful documentation of what had occurred. Facts first, interpretation later. What had been said, what had been done, what outcome had been achieved. By the time he finished, midnight had come and gone. He filed the report electronically, sent copies to the appropriate supervisors, and closed his laptop with a sense of completion. Another day done, another crisis managed, if not solved. In his bedroom, Corvin lay in darkness and listened to the night sounds of the reservation. Distant dogs barking, the rumble of a truck on the highway, the wind in the cottonwoods outside his window. Ordinary sounds, comforting in their familiarity. Tomorrow would bring new calls, new crises, new people in desperate situations needing help. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, he'd done what he could. Had stood in the gap between a desperate man and disaster, had helped navigate toward a resolution that, while not perfect, was better than the alternative. And as sleep finally claimed him, Corvin's last thought was of Raymond's children, hugging their father goodbye. Of the tears and the promises and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, things would be okay. It wasn't much, but it was something. And in this work, something was often all you got. 6 days after the Sosi situation, Corvin found himself back in the field with Ira, this time responding to a welfare check in the hills east of Kayenta. The call had come in from a social worker who'd been unable to reach an elderly client for 3 days, unusual enough to warrant a visit. Standard procedure, routine even, the kind of call that filled the majority of their shifts. The road deteriorated as they climbed, pavement giving way to graded dirt and then to twin tracks through sage and juniper. Ira drove, his confidence behind the wheel growing with each shift, though he still gripped the steering wheel tight enough to blanch his knuckles on rough sections. "How much further?" he asked, eyeing the odometer. Corvin checked the hand-drawn map the social worker had provided. "Should be another mile or so. Look for a stock tank on the left, then a right turn onto an even smaller track." "Smaller than this? We'll be walking." "Might be. Vehicle access isn't always guaranteed out here." They found the stock tank, a rusted metal cylinder surrounded by churned earth where livestock had watered. The turnoff was barely visible, more suggestion than actual road. Ira eased the unit onto it, carefully avoiding rocks that could puncture tires or damage the undercarriage. The house appeared around a bend, a small frame structure that had probably been built in the 50s and hadn't seen significant maintenance since. The roof sagged in the middle, windows were covered with plywood, and the whole structure listed slightly to one side like a ship taking on water. A battered pickup truck sat beside it, tires flat and one door hanging open. "Looks abandoned," Ira said, bringing the unit to a stop. "Looks can be deceiving." Corvin climbed out and surveyed the property. A clothesline stretched between two posts, holding garments that moved gently in the breeze. Chicken tracks marked the dust around a small coop. Someone was living here or had been recently. He approached the front door and knocked, calling out in Navajo first and then English. No response. He tried the door and found it unlocked, swinging open on hinges that shrieked in protest. The interior was dim, illuminated only by light filtering through cracks in the plywood window covers. As his eyes adjusted, Corvin could make out furnishings that were sparse but cared for. A small table with 2 chairs, a wood stove in one corner, shelves holding canned goods and cooking implements. Everything was neat, organized, the home of someone who took pride in what little they had. "Mrs. Yazzie," he called. "This is Lieutenant Sin, Navajo Police. Your social worker asked us to check on you." Movement in the back room, a shuffling sound followed by a voice so thin it was barely audible. "In here." He found her in a small bedroom, lying on a narrow bed covered with faded quilts. She was ancient, her face a map of wrinkles, eyes milky with cataracts. One arm lay outside the covers, the hand swollen to twice its normal size and mottled with purple bruising. "Mrs. Yazzie, I'm Lieutenant Sin. Looks like you're hurt. When did this happen?" 3 days. Her voice was stronger now, clarifying with use. "Fell carrying water. Landed wrong." "Have you been able to get up since then?" "Once. Made it to the bucket there." She gestured weakly toward a corner where a plastic bucket sat. Confirmation that she'd been trapped here for 3 days with minimal water and no food. Corvin keyed his radio. "Dispatch, I need medical response to my location. Elderly female, dehydrated, possible fracture to left arm. Advise EMS the road is rough, they'll need to take it slow." "Copy that. EMS is 45 minutes out from Kayenta." 45 minutes. Corvin moved to the small kitchen and found a cup, filled it with water from a jug, and brought it back to Mrs. Yazzie. He helped her drink, supporting her head, noting how her hands trembled with weakness. "Where's your family?" he asked gently. "Daughter's in Flagstaff, son's somewhere, don't know where. Haven't heard from him in years. We'll get hold of your daughter, let her know what's happened. Don't want to be a burden. You're not a burden. You're hurt and you need help. That's what we're here for." Ira appeared in the doorway. "Lieutenant, I checked the rest of the house. She's got maybe 2 days' worth of food in the cupboard, and the water jug is nearly empty. How long has she been living like this?" "Long enough that it's normal." Corvin turned back to Mrs. Yazzie. "The social worker who called us, what services have you been getting? She brings food once a month, checks on me, makes sure I'm okay. Good girl, that one, always respectful. But she hasn't been here in 3 days. Was supposed to come Monday. This is Saturday, isn't it?" Confusion clouded her eyes. "Or is it Sunday?" "It's Saturday. Monday was 4 days ago." "Oh." The word was small, lost. "I've been here longer than I thought." The 45 minutes stretched as Corvin and Ira did what they could to make Mrs. Yazzie comfortable. Ira found firewood and got the stove going to chase the chill from the house. Corvin located food and heated soup, spooning it into her mouth a little at a time. She ate slowly, each swallow an effort, but color began to return to her face. "Tell me about this place," Corvin said as they waited. "How long have you lived here?" 63 years. Husband built it when we married, him and his brothers. Raised 4 children here." Her good hand plucked at the quilt. "He's gone now, 3 of the children too. Just Sarah left, and she's got her own life in the city. You ever think about moving? Somewhere with more support, closer to services." "Leave here? This is my home. My husband's buried on that hill behind the house. My parents not far from him. When my time comes, I'll join them. Can't do that if I'm in some facility in town." Corvin understood. The land wasn't just property out here. It was identity, connection, the physical embodiment of family and history. Asking someone to leave it was like asking them to stop being themselves. The EMS crew arrived in a converted four-wheel drive ambulance, two paramedics who moved with practiced efficiency. They assessed Mrs. Yazzie, confirmed Corvin's suspicion of a fractured wrist, and gently loaded her onto a stretcher. She protested weakly, insisting she didn't want to leave, but pain and exhaustion had stolen her ability to resist. "We'll notify your daughter," Corvin promised as they carried her out. "And we'll make sure the house is secure. You focus on getting better." After the ambulance departed, Corvin and Ira spent an hour documenting the scene and securing the property. They fed the chickens, filled water containers, and made sure the house was locked. Then Corvin sat in the patrol unit and made calls, tracking down Sarah Yazzie through the social worker's contact list. The conversation was difficult. Sarah was shocked, guilty, defensive all at once. Yes, she knew her mother was isolated. No, she hadn't been able to visit in months because of work. Yes, she understood the situation was serious. She'd drive up tomorrow, would figure out what needed to happen next. "Think she'll actually come?" Ira asked after Corvin ended the call. "Hope so. But even if she does, what then? Force an 80-year-old woman to leave her home against her will? There's no good answer here." They drove back to Kayenta in silence, each processing what they'd seen. At the station, Corvin filed his report with mechanical precision, documenting facts without editorial comment. Elderly resident found incapacitated, medical assistance rendered, family notified. Clean, professional, giving no hint of the larger questions the situation raised. But the questions haunted him anyway. How many other people were out there, living in isolation, one accident away from serious harm or death? How many fell through the cracks because they were too proud to ask for help, too attached to their land to accept relocation, too forgotten by family who'd moved on to urban lives? The answer, he knew, was too many. And there was no policy or procedure that could address the fundamental problem of a vast territory, limited resources, and people determined to maintain traditional ways of life regardless of the risks. 2 days later, Shawnee called him. "Got an update on Raymond Sosi. Good news or bad?" "Bit of both. The lawyers I connected him with found a procedural error in the foreclosure notice. Nothing major, but enough to get the bank to negotiate. He's going to lose the land eventually, but they've agreed to give him 6 months and help with relocation costs. That's better than nothing." "Yeah." And the prosecutor agreed to diversion on the criminal charges. Raymond completes anger management counseling and community service. The charges get dismissed. He'll have a record of the arrest but no conviction. How's he handling it? Better. Marie took him back on the condition he gets serious help, which he's doing. Started therapy, joined a men's group at the church. Says it's helping him process some old trauma from his military service. Corvin felt something ease in his chest. Good. That's really good. Wanted you to know your patience paid off. Could have gone very differently if you'd forced the issue that first day. After hanging up, Corvin sat at his desk and thought about patterns. The Sosi case and Mrs. Yazzie's situation were different in specifics, but similar in essence. Both involved people under stress, isolated by geography or circumstance, struggling with systems that weren't designed to address their particular needs. Both required responses that went beyond standard law enforcement, demanded human connection and creative problem-solving. It was exhausting work, never really finished, always revealing new crises that needed attention. But it was also the work that mattered most, the unglamorous daily effort of holding communities together. His phone buzzed with a text from Ira. "Just finished my first month. Wanted to say thanks for being patient while I figure this out." Corvin smiled and typed back, "You're doing fine. Keep asking questions and listening more than you talk. You'll be okay." That evening, he drove out to the overlook where he sometimes went to think. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of crimson and gold. From here, he could see for miles, could trace the roads that connected scattered communities across the vast landscape of the Navajo Nation. Each of those roads led to someone's home, someone's story. Some of those stories would intersect with his work, would require his intervention or assistance. Others would unfold unseen, private struggles that never rose to the level of official notice. He couldn't save everyone, couldn't solve every problem. The territory was too large, the issues too complex, the resources too limited. But he could respond when called, could bring patience and humanity to difficult situations, could serve as a bridge between people in crisis and the systems meant to help them. It wasn't enough, it would never be enough. But it was what he had to offer, and he would keep offering it for as long as he was able. His radio crackled to life. "All units, we have a report of a missing child near Red Mesa. 6-year-old girl wandered away from home approximately 2 hours ago." Corvin keyed the mic. "This is Lieutenant Sin. I'm 20 minutes from Red Mesa. Responding." He pulled away from the overlook and headed north into gathering darkness, toward another crisis that needed managing. Behind him, the sun dipped below the horizon, and the desert began its transformation into a realm of shadows and uncertain shapes. Somewhere ahead, a child was lost and frightened. A family was desperate for help, and he would do what he always did, would bring every resource and skill he possessed to bear on the problem, would work until the situation was resolved or exhaustion forced him to stop. That was the job. That was the calling. And as he drove through the deepening night, Corvin felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle over him like a familiar coat. Heavy, yes. Uncomfortable, certainly. But his to carry, for as long as he had the strength. The missing child case took 14 hours to resolve, a search that involved multiple units combing through rough country and darkness. They found her at dawn, curled up asleep in a small cave, scared but unharmed. The reunion with her parents was tearful and joyful, one of those rare moments when everything turned out okay. Corvin filed his report and went home to sleep for 6 hours before his next shift began. The cycle continued, endless and demanding, but he wouldn't have chosen any other work. This was where he belonged, standing in the gap between crisis and resolution, offering whatever help was possible to people who needed it most. And as he drifted off to sleep, his last conscious thought was of Raymond Sosi working through his anger in therapy, of Mrs. Yazzie, hopefully recovering in a hospital bed, of a little girl safe at home with her family. Small victories, all of them, but victories nonetheless. And in this work, you learn to appreciate the small ones because they were what kept you going when the larger battles seemed unwinnable. The call came at 2:17 in the morning, 3 weeks after the Tsosi incident. Corvin was asleep when his phone rang, dragging him from dreams of empty desert roads into the harsh reality of his bedroom. He fumbled for the phone, saw dispatch on the screen, and knew before answering that it would be bad. Nothing good happened at 2:17 a.m. Sin, Lieutenant, we have a barricade situation near San Osti. Subject is armed, threatening self-harm, and there's a hostage situation developing. Command wants you on scene. Corvin was already pulling on his uniform. Details? Male subject, mid-30s, holed up in a trading post with the owner. Says he won't come out, won't let the owner leave. Demands to speak with tribal council about land rights. Units are establishing perimeter now. Shawnee Manny Mules available? Negative. She's in Santa Fe for training. Won't be back until Thursday. Corvin cursed under his breath. Who's the responding officer? Officer Claw is first on scene. He's maintaining position but requesting supervision. Of course it was Ira. The rookie was competent but still learning, and a hostage barricade was well beyond his training level. Tell him I'm 20 minutes out. Nobody approaches until I arrive. The drive to Sanosti was a blur of darkness and adrenaline. Corvin ran scenarios in his head, applying everything he'd learned from Shawnee and from 2 decades of experience. Establish communication, identify demands, build rapport, find leverage points. Keep everyone calm, don't escalate, be patient. But without Shawnee, he was the primary negotiator, and hostage situations were unforgiving of mistakes. He found Ira's unit blocking the road 100 yards from the trading post, emergency lights painting the darkness in strobing red and blue. The young officer stood behind his door, hand on his weapon, eyes fixed on the building ahead. Corvin parked and approached at a crouch. Status: subject is inside with the owner, a Mr. Begay. Subject's name is Vernon Nez. He's got a hunting rifle and he's fired 2 warning shots, one through the window and one into the ceiling. Says he'll kill the hostage if we try to come in. What's his demand? Wants tribal council to cancel a lease agreement on some grazing land. Says the land was promised to his family and the council violated trust by leasing it to someone else. How long has he been in there? About 90 minutes. He called dispatch himself, made his demands, then stopped answering the phone. Corvin studied the trading post through binoculars. It was a single-story adobe structure with a flat roof, maybe 40 feet across. 2 windows in front, both dark. 1 door, solid wood, currently closed. No other visible exits, though there might be a back door. Other units? 2 more en route, but they're at least 30 minutes out. It's just us right now. Just us. Corvin felt the weight of it, the responsibility of making decisions that could mean life or death. He pulled out his notebook and sketched the building, marking sight lines and potential approach routes. Then he keyed his radio. Dispatch, this is Lieutenant Sin. Patch me through to Vernon Nez's phone. Static, then ringing. Once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, a voice answered, tense and wary. Who's this? My name is Corvin Sin. I'm a lieutenant with the Navajo police. Vernon, I want to help you, but I need to understand what's happening. Can you talk to me? Already told dispatch what I want. Tribal council needs to fix this. I understand you're upset about the grazing lease. That's a legitimate concern, but holding Mr. Begay won't solve it. Let him go, and you and I can discuss options. No, they'll just arrest me the second he walks out. I won't lie to you, Vernon. There will be consequences for this. But those consequences get worse the longer this goes on. Right now, we can still resolve this peacefully. Peacefully? You mean where I give up everything and trust the same system that screwed my family? Vernon's laugh was bitter. I'm done trusting. Corvin heard something in the background, a muffled voice. The hostage, probably. Is Mr. Begay okay? He's fine, scared, but fine. Hasn't done anything wrong, he's just insurance. Insurance against what? Against you people rushing in here and shooting me. As long as I have him, you'll think twice. You're right, we will. Which means you have leverage, Vernon. Use it wisely. Tell me what you really want beyond the council fixing the lease. Silence on the line. Corvin could hear breathing, could picture Vernon thinking it through. I want them to admit they were wrong, to acknowledge that they violated the agreement my grandfather made. I want a public apology and fair compensation. That's reasonable. I can't promise the council will agree, but I can promise to deliver your message and advocate for a meeting. But that only works if you let Mr. Begay go and surrender peacefully. How do I know you're not just saying that to get me to give up? You don't. You have to trust me, which I know is hard after everything you've been through. But Vernon, I've been doing this job for 23 years. I've seen a lot of situations like yours where people feel like the system failed them. And you know what? Sometimes they're right. The system does fail people. But handling it like this doesn't fix anything. It just makes everything worse. More silence. Then Vernon said, "I want to talk to someone from the council, face to face. They come here, hear me out, then I'll think about letting him go. That could take hours to arrange. Mr. Begay's an older man, Vernon. He can't stay comfortable in there forever. Let him go now, as a gesture of good faith, and I'll personally call council members and get someone out here. No. He stays until I get what I want." Corvin pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling the situation calcifying. Without Shawnee's expertise, he was navigating by instinct and hoping it was enough. "Okay, I hear you, but I need something in return. Let me talk to Mr. Begay, verify he's okay. You can listen to the whole conversation." Vernon considered. "Fine, but you try anything, this goes bad fast." There was shuffling. Then an older voice came on the line, quavering but controlled. "This is Harold Begay." "Mr. Begay, I'm Lieutenant Sin. Are you injured?" "No, shaken up, but not hurt." "Has Vernon threatened you directly?" "He's scared and angry, but he hasn't hurt me. Just wants to be heard." "I understand. Can you hang on a little longer while we work this out?" "I can try, but Lieutenant, I need my medication, heart pills. They're behind the counter." Corvin's gut tightened. Medical complications changed everything. "Vernon, did you hear that? Mr. Begay needs his medication." Vernon came back on the line. "I heard. The pills are right here. I'll make sure he gets them." "Thank you. That's good, Vernon. That shows you're trying to do right by him. Shows you're not trying to hurt anyone. Never wanted to hurt anybody. Just wanted to be heard." "I know, and I'm hearing you. Let me make some calls. See about getting a council member out here. But Vernon, if Mr. Begay's condition changes, if he needs medical attention, you have to let him go. Deal?" "Deal." Corvin ended the call and immediately dialed the tribal council office. It went to voicemail. He tried 3 members' personal numbers before getting one to answer. A woman named Rita Benally who sounded groggy and irritated. "This is his Lieutenant Corvin Sin, Navajo Police. I need you to come to San Osti immediately. We have a hostage situation involving a land dispute, and the subject is demanding to speak with council." Rita woke up fast. "A hostage situation? Over what lease?" "The Nez family grazing rights. Vernon Nez is holding the trading post owner and won't release him until someone from council hears his grievance." "Jesus. Okay, I'm familiar with that case. It's complicated, but there might be room for negotiation. I can be there in an hour." "Make it 45 minutes if you can. We've got an elderly hostage who needs medication and a subject who's running on emotion and exhaustion. Clock's ticking." After hanging up, Corvin briefed Ira on the situation and the plan. "When Rita gets here, I'll facilitate a conversation through the door. Vernon comes out. We take him into custody, hopefully without incident. Your job is to stay ready but not visible. We don't want to spook him with too much police presence." "Understood. Sir, can I ask something?" "Go ahead." "How do you stay calm? My heart's been racing since I got here, and you're just methodical about everything." Corvin smiled grimly. "My heart's racing too, Ira. I'm just better at hiding it. The calm is a performance, a necessary one. People in crisis respond to our energy. If we're panicked, they panic. If we're steady, it gives them space to be steady too. And if the performance doesn't work, then we adapt. But that's why we have procedures, protocols, training. So, when instinct fails, we have structure to fall back on." The 45 minutes felt like hours. Corvin maintained periodic contact with Vernon, checking on Mr. Begay's condition and providing updates on Rita's arrival. Each conversation was a delicate balance, offering enough reassurance to keep Vernon calm without making promises he couldn't keep. When Rita's vehicle finally appeared, headlights cutting through darkness, Corvin felt relief mixed with new tension. This was the critical moment, when they'd either resolve peacefully or watch the situation deteriorate. He met Rita away from the trading post and briefed her quickly. Keep it simple. Acknowledge his grievance, commit to reviewing the case, give him a path forward that doesn't involve continuing this standoff. What if the lease is legitimate? What if counsel did nothing wrong? Then you tell him the truth, but you do it respectfully. Right now, he doesn't need to win, he needs to be heard. Give him that, and we can probably end this. They approached the trading post together, stopping 20 feet from the door. Corvin called out, "Vernon, it's Lieutenant Sin. I've got council member Rita Benally here. She's familiar with your family's case and ready to listen." The door cracked open, rifle barrel visible in the gap. "How do I know this isn't a trick?" Rita stepped forward, hands raised and visible. "Vernon Nez, I know your grandfather Joseph, good man. I remember when your family filed the original complaint about the grazing lease. I'm here because Lieutenant Tessin said you needed to be heard, and I agree. You deserve that. You're really counsel?" "I am, and I'm willing to sit down right now and discuss this, but not while you're holding Harold Begay. Let him go, come out peacefully, and we'll talk. You have my word." Vernon was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost its hard edge. "What happens to me?" Corvin answered. "You'll be arrested, Vernon. I won't lie about that. But cooperation now will count for a lot in how this case gets handled, and Rita's commitment to review your grievance stands regardless. And Harold, he's really okay? Let me see for myself, and I'll tell you." The door opened wider. Harold Begay emerged, moving slowly but under his own power. Ira guided him away from the building to safety. Then Vernon appeared, the rifle held loosely in one hand, pointed at the ground. "I'm putting the gun down," he called. "Don't shoot." "Nobody's shooting," Corvin replied. "Set it down. Step away from it and walk toward me. Hands visible." Vernon complied, moving with exhausted resignation. When he was 10 feet away, Corvin approached and gently took his arm. "You did the right thing, Vernon. That took courage. Doesn't feel like courage. Feels like losing. You're alive. Harold's alive. And you'll get a chance to be heard. Under the circumstances, that's about as close to winning as this situation allowed." They cuffed Vernon without resistance and secured him in Ira's unit. Rita sat with him for 20 minutes, taking notes and asking questions about the grazing lease. By the time the backup units arrived, the crisis was over, resolved through patience and dialogue rather than force. Corvin filed his report as dawn broke, documenting every detail with careful precision. Hostage situation, peaceful resolution, subject cooperative, no injuries, professional and clean, giving no hint of the fear he'd carried through those tense hours. Later that morning, over bad coffee in the station break room, Shawnee called. She'd heard about the incident and wanted details. "Sounds like you handled it perfectly," she said after he'd recounted the night. "Handled it adequately. You would have done better." "Maybe. Or maybe you're learning to trust your instincts. Not every situation needs a trained negotiator, Corvin. Sometimes it just needs someone who cares enough to listen." After hanging up, Corvin sat alone in the quiet station and thought about the month. Raymond Tassosi, Mrs. Yazzie, the missing child, now Vernon Nez. Each situation different in specifics but similar in essence. People in crisis, systems failing them, desperate acts born of desperation. And in each case, resolution had come not through force or adherence to strict protocol, but through human connection, through patience and listening and the willingness to see people as individuals rather than problems to be solved. It was exhausting work, but it was also the work that mattered most. His phone buzzed. Ira had texted, "Learning a lot from you. Thank you for showing me what good policing looks like." Corvin smiled and put the phone away. Maybe he was doing something right after all. Maybe the next generation would carry these lessons forward, would continue to prioritize humanity over procedure when the situation called for it. He hoped so. Because the territory was vast and the problems were endless, and the only thing standing between chaos and community was officers willing to do the hard, patient work of caring. Outside, the sun climbed higher, painting the desert in shades of gold. Somewhere out there, another crisis was brewing, another person reaching the end of their rope. And when the call came, Corvin would respond, would bring everything he had learned and everything he believed to bear on the problem. Because that was the job. Not the enforcement of laws, though that mattered. Not the maintenance of order, though that was important. The real job was standing in the gap between people and the systems that failed them, offering whatever help was possible, however imperfect. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough, but it was what he had to give, and he would keep giving it for as long as he was able.